Robb Stark was supposed to die, cut down by treachery at the Twins on a night soaked in blood and betrayal. The hall had been filled with the sour smell of spilled wine and the stink of fear, a cacophony of screams, steel, and roaring flames that devoured Frey banners and Stark honor alike. But perhaps the gods were not so cruel as to let the last son of Eddard Stark vanish into the annals of a brief and bloody reign. By some sliver of mercy or twist of fate, Robb did not breathe his final breath in that wretched hall. Instead, he felt a jarring impact, a blow from a mailed fist that rang against his skull and hurled him to the ground, unconscious but still clinging to life. Men thought him dead in the chaos, stepping over his body as they rushed to murder or flee. The Freys did not check for a pulse. They had bigger concerns, crowing a victory and rushing to secure the keep. Fate intervened in the form of a loyal retainer who dragged Robb out into the darkness of night, ignoring the swirl of arrows and swords. He was spirited away with barely a heartbeat to spare. He woke days later, throat parched and wounds burning, in a small hut near the banks of the Trident. A woman he did not know, old, gnarled by years and stooped from sorrow, cleaned his wounds and pressed bitter remedies to his lips, speaking quietly of the old gods. Slowly, reality crashed upon him. The images of the Red Wedding's horror snatched at his mind in delirious flashes, the rasp of steel as his men were cut down, his mother's anguished cry, the mocking laughter of Roose Bolton and Walder Frey. Fury and grief mingled, spurring him to rise before he was ready, prompting him to stumble outside only to collapse in the muck. He was no longer king in the north, but a phantom cloaked in shame. Word of the massacre and his supposed demise had spread. All that remained of Robb Stark was a memory. Yet he still drew breath. That meant, in the eyes of the gods, there was a chance for retribution. He pressed the woman for news, hungry for every scrap of rumor. She told him of the Freys celebrating their part in the betrayal, how they had paraded the corpse of a dire wolf around the keep. Men bragged that Robb's head was mounted on a pike. Some claimed it had been sewn onto Grey Wind's body as a grotesque mockery of the king in the north. But she also told him that House Bolton had returned to the Dreadfort, that the Lannisters in King's Landing now believed their foes scattered. The north was left leaderless under the dominion of traitors. Whatever small allied forces remained had retreated or sworn fealty to the Iron Throne. Robb listened, his fists clenching until his nails drew blood on his palms. Yet despair was never the Stark way. He had not survived only to sink into hopelessness. Haggard and haunted, he mulled over what remained of his future. He had no army, no kingdom, no loyal bannermen rushing to rally under his banner. All the young wolves who had marched south were either butchered or captured. But he remembered his father's teachings: where there is life, there is possibility. The old woman, whose name was Melis, told him of unrest across the sea, of a Targaryen girl with dragons in Slaver's Bay. He knew the story. It was whispered in secret among the northern lords loyal to the old ways, Daenerys Stormborn, last scion of a fallen dynasty. Perhaps she too was a ghost returning to set the world to rights. Robb found himself dwelling on that name, Daenerys, as he tested his strength each day against his battered body. The Stark name had been all but extinguished in the South's eyes, but if he was to avenge his family, if he was to fulfill the vow of protecting the North, he would need more than a hidden life. Revenge alone would not resurrect what he had lost. The Targaryen girl had dragons, if the tales were true, and an ambition to claim the Iron Throne. If she ever chose to sail for Westeros, she might be the only challenger strong enough to topple House Lannister and their traitorous allies. The Freys and Boltons had sworn fealty to the throne that called itself Baratheon but was truly Lannister gold. If Robb could reach Daenerys, if he could somehow convince her that House Stark was worth her trust, they might, together, shatter the hold of those who had committed such foul treachery. Winter was coming, as it always did. He felt it in every breath, in every moment. He recalled the day his father was killed, the moment his mother was slain before his eyes. Winter was here for him, thick in the air. But that familiar Stark refrain was also a warning to his enemies. Like the cold wind from the far north, he might sweep down upon them in the end. For now, though, he was too broken to do anything but heal. Days turned into weeks, and the small hut by the Trident became a cocoon of sorts. In that time, he gathered what coin he could from what meager valuables he had left. He parted ways with the good woman, leaving her far more silver than she had ever seen. Though she told him it was too much, he insisted. Then, one dawn, he set forth under a false name, wearing a hooded cloak that concealed his identity, and began the long journey to the sea. He was forced to avoid roads where Lannister and Frey patrols might roam. He slipped through the woods like a shadow, living off the land as best he could. The ghosts of his father's teachings guided him how to move silently, how to find safe paths across streams, how to set snares for rabbits in the underbrush. Memories of better days, him chasing Bran through the courtyards of Winterfell, him smiling at Jon as they practiced swordplay, sustained him when exhaustion tugged at his bones. He was alone. There was no gray wind bounding ahead with protective loyalty. His beloved dire wolf had perished that night with so many others. The raw wound of that loss ached in him whenever the forest grew silent and he imagined the great beast by his side again. Eventually, with cunning and grit, he found his way south, slipping past watchful eyes until he reached Maidenpool. There, he used his last reserves of coin to gain passage on a ship bound for Pentos under the guise of a low-born traveler seeking honest work across the narrow sea. In his youth, he had hardly imagined venturing so far beyond Winterfell. But the boy who once laughed with Theon Greyjoy in the training yard was gone. In his place stood a man older than his years, forged by heartbreak and betrayal. If he had to cross an ocean and kneel before a Targaryen queen for the sake of vengeance and the hope of a freer north, he would do it. The sea voyage tested him further. Storms battered the vessel, and he found himself retching over the side more than once. The sailors were a rough mix of Westerosi exiles and Essosi merchants, their conversation laced with rumors. One rumor in particular took his breath. Daenerys Targaryen had conquered Astapor, Yunkai, and Meereen, freeing slaves and raising armies. She had 3 dragons, all grown to a size that rattled her enemies. She was rumored to be beautiful, strong-willed, and bold. Some called her the breaker of chains. Robb let his gaze wander over the churning waters, imagining a woman with pale hair like moonlight, eyes that burned with fire. She had once been a mere girl who fled Westeros with her brother. Now she was a ruler in her own right, forging an empire across the sea. He felt a faint spark of hope. If anyone could challenge the Lannisters, it might be this dragon queen. Landing in Pentos, he kept his hood low. Although the city was no friend to the Lannisters, strangers' tongues wagged freely. Word traveled quickly, and one never knew who might be listening. He learned of a traveling retinue headed east toward the Valyrian roads, eventually crossing to Meereen. In such places of swirling trade caravans and bizarre tongues, a lone swordsman might find anonymity. He sold the ring that bore the sigil of House Stark, his father's ring. Pained him to lose it, but necessity demanded resources for the journey. This was how desperate the young wolf had become, relinquishing precious relics to fund the next step in a dangerous quest. Weeks in the caravan tested him once more, now under the scorching sun of Essos. He labored to show no sign of his birth or breeding. He was a hired sword with skill enough to impress travelers who feared brigands on the old roads. At night, he dreamt of the north. The crisp air, the endless pine forests, the face of his mother just before she was taken. He would awaken in a cold sweat, face damp from tears or stung by the memory of steel through flesh. Dawn brought him back to the lonely truth. He was a pauper on a foreign continent, clinging to a mission that might be madness. But each mile brought him closer to the place where Daenerys Targaryen reigned. Along the way, he heard new stories. The queen had formed a council of freedmen and seasoned warriors, forging a new order in Meereen. Yet war still burned around her as slavers, unsettled lords, and rebellious factions tried to topple her regime. The dragons were terrifying, a symbol of her might and her wrath. Some folks worshipped her, others feared she might become a tyrant. Robb had to see for himself. If she was the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, or at least a strong claimant with enough power to break the Lannisters, he would do whatever it took to secure her help. When finally he crested the hill that revealed Meereen's great pyramids rising above the horizon, Robb felt his heart pound. The city was an intricate sprawl of ancient brick walls, broad avenues, and towering monuments, all tinged by the pale desert dust. Banners bearing a 3-headed dragon flapped in the wind. Outside the gates, lines of refugees and merchants queued to enter or leave. The gates were well guarded by soldiers in strange armor, perhaps unsullied, the legendary eunuch warriors whose loyalty was said to be unbreakable. They were spears and shields marked with the Targaryen crest. It was a sign that Daenerys indeed held dominion here. Robb joined the throng, silent and watchful. He had never seen such a mix of faces, men and women from countless corners of the world, ex-slaves wearing relief on their faces, well-dressed Myrish traders complaining about taxes, and fierce-looking Dothraki horsemen patrolling. Finding an inn near the central market, he heard tales from travelers who called the queen fair and just, though her rule was tested by conspiracies within and beyond the city. Some whispered of a young mercenary captain from Westeros who was pressing for an audience, others talked of envoys from various free cities seeking alliances. The most persistent rumor was that Daenerys still had not decided whether or when to cross the sea to claim the Iron Throne. Stripping away the last vestiges of his old rank, Robb approached one of the local mercenary captains about potential work, hoping the man might have a route to the Queen's ear. He soon discovered that countless Sellswords yearned to join the Targaryen cause, drawn by legend and gold alike. But entry to the Queen's presence was tightly controlled. The Unsullied kept watch over the royal quarters with unwavering vigilance, and a swarm of petitioners daily sought to present their pleas. For days, Robb observed from afar, learning the rhythms of court. He heard the Queen sometimes rode her dragons high above the city at night. He glimpsed a flicker in the sky once, and the silhouette of a monstrous shape stole his breath. At last, fortune favored him. As he returned to the inn one evening, a group of men cornered him in an alley, blades drawn. They were local toughs, or perhaps hired by someone who suspected he had gold. Robb, though still recovering from his injuries, had not forgotten how to fight. The memory of war returned in a flash of steel and muscle memory. He dispatched too quickly, and the others fled, leaving him bloodied but alive. Word of his skill must have spread. Within days, he was approached by an official from the Queen's own guard, told in quiet hushes that his sword arm might be of use. He only needed to prove his loyalty. Robb did not balk at the chance. If he had to fight for Daenerys to secure her trust, so be it. Soon he found himself tested by one of her appointed captains, an older knight from Westeros named Ser Barristan Selmy, who was said to be a legendary swordsman and the last of the old Kingsguard loyal to House Targaryen. Ser Barristan studied him carefully, perhaps seeing something in his stance that hinted at northern training. But Robb wore no sigil, offered no name but a false one, a choice that made his chest tighten whenever he said it. The old knight sparred with him, steel clashing, and though Robb's injuries slowed him, he fought with a fierce determination. In the end, Barristan held a blade to Robb's throat, but there was respect in his eyes. "You fight well," Selmy said, removing his helm. "But your style is familiar. Who trained you?" Robb lowered his gaze. "An old master in the north. He died," he lied, voice coarse. "I've wandered a long way. I'm here to serve the Queen if she'll have me." Ser Barristan frowned, clearly unconvinced by the half-truth. But he nodded and gestured for Robb to follow him deeper into the palace. Nervous tension twisted in Robb's stomach. Any slip could expose him. And what if Daenerys, in hearing the name Stark, decided he was an enemy or a worthless exile? She might not care about a defeated house. He steeled himself. The corridors within the Great Pyramid were wide and lined with torches, the walls carved with ancient murals. Slaves once built these passages, but now freedmen worked and walked freely. Robb saw a handful of courtiers waiting in an antechamber, a slender woman with measured poise, a scarred warrior with the bearing of a Dothraki Khal, and a small council that whispered among themselves. Ser Barristan led him through another set of doors. The chamber they entered was lit by braziers and grand windows. And there, seated on a dais, was Daenerys Targaryen herself. She was younger than he had imagined, perhaps a year or two younger than him, but her gaze possessed an intensity that belied those years. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her hair a cascade of silver-gold tresses. A trio of scaled beasts, each no larger than a large hound, lounged near the edges of the chamber, smoke curling from their nostrils. Dragons. Real dragons. Robb had thought he was ready to see them, but the sight made his heart hammer. Their black and red scales gleamed, eyes bright with a predator's intelligence. Daenerys looked him over, her expression unreadable. "Ser Barristan speaks well of your skill, Ed," she said softly. Her voice was pleasant, but beneath it was an undercurrent of command. "You wish to fight for me?" Robb bowed slightly, though the motion felt alien to him. "Aye, your grace. If you'll have me." She studied him. Silence stretched in the chamber, broken only by the occasional hiss from one of the dragons. Then she beckoned him forward. "So many come to my door these days. They whisper empty words of loyalty, hoping to earn gold or favor. Why would I trust you?" His throat constricted. He contemplated speaking of justice, of vengeance, but the memory of the red wedding still made words stick in his throat. "I lost everything in Westeros," he said finally, voice subdued. "Men I loved, a home I was proud to serve. I want to help you bring down those who destroyed my life. If you plan to cross the sea one day to break the power of the Lannisters and their ilk, then my sword is yours." A flicker of curiosity crossed her features. "You speak of the Lannisters as if they are your sworn foes." Are you some loyal retainer of House Tyrell or Martell? He lowered his gaze, unsure how much to reveal. If he lied completely, it might come back to haunt him. I served a northern house, he said. But they're all gone now. The Lannisters, along with their allies, killed them at a wedding. Perhaps you have heard the rumors? He saw something change in her expression, pity, horror, perhaps recognition of the famed Red Wedding. I have heard the rumors. The Red Wedding was a massacre. A betrayal that still echoes across the sea. Her voice hardened. If the stories are true, then I share your hatred for those behind it. Before she could question him further, a eunuch official swept into the room to deliver urgent news about a disturbance in the lower quarter. Daenerys glanced at him, then at Robb, and rose from her seat. Ser Barristan, keep him close for now. I want to see for myself if his loyalty matches his skill. In the weeks that followed, Robb proved himself daily. The city was rife with tensions. Newly freed slaves clashed with former masters, outlaws skulked in dark corners, and foreign agents plotted to undermine the Targaryen rule. He fought alongside the Unsullied to quell riots and break up criminal rings, always mindful to keep his identity concealed. Daenerys, when she encountered him, would exchange brief words, her curiosity never fully sated. Ser Barristan watched him like a hawk, suspecting more than Robb revealed but withholding judgment. One afternoon, while patrolling the slums, Robb found himself defending a group of unarmed free women from a gang of cutthroats who resented their new freedom. The fight was fierce and bloody, with Robb outnumbered 4-1. But the memory of his mother's death fueled him, stoking his rage and giving him strength. He cut them down and earned the gratitude of the women who later approached the queen to praise the bravery of Ed, the northern swordsman. When Daenerys summoned him that evening, he braced for confrontation. She received him on a balcony overlooking the city. The setting sun bathed the sandstone walls in shades of gold and rose. A warm breeze tugged at her pale hair. 2 dragons perched on the parapet nearby, far larger than they had been only weeks ago, as if they grew with each passing day. Daenerys studied him, her expression more open than before. The women you saved spoke highly of your courage, she said softly. They said you fought with the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. Robb inclined his head. It was the right thing to do. Sometimes the right thing is the hardest. She glanced at the dragons. I'm told your accent is northern, though you hide it well. The north is a cold land with proud people. One of my knights was once a warden of the north, Ser Jorah Mormont. Perhaps you know the name. Robb's heart twisted. House Mormont had been loyal to his house, though Jorah's exile was well known. I have heard of him, he said carefully. He's away on your service, as I understand? A flash of sadness passed over her face. He betrayed me. Spied on me for the Lannisters at first. He claimed to have changed, but I could not abide betrayal. He left me. She shook her head. Loyalty is everything. Once broken, it's difficult to mend. Robb felt her words keenly. Betrayal was the reason his house fell. He could hardly fault her for exiling a man who spied on her. I understand, Your Grace. I have known betrayal as well. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. You speak as if your entire life was undone by it. That wedding you mentioned. The Red Wedding. House Stark was destroyed that day. Its king was murdered along with most of his men. Her gaze sharpened. Why do I feel you know more than you say? Silence stretched. He weighed the risk. Finally, he reached for the leather cord around his neck. Attached was a small token carved from weirwood in the shape of a direwolf's head, something he had taken to wearing after selling his ring. He had hidden it beneath his tunic, but now he pulled it out, letting T dangle in the dying light. Daenerys' eyes widened slightly. A direwolf. I am Robb Stark, he confessed quietly, feeling a lump in his throat as he spoke his own name aloud. Somehow, by the gods' grace, I survived the Red Wedding. My mother did not. Nor did my direwolf, my bannermen, or my dream of a free north. I came here because I had no other hope. The dragon stirred, sensing the tension. Daenerys inhaled sharply, her surprise warring with caution. She looked at him with new eyes. Robb Stark, she repeated as if testing the name for truth. You were king in the north. Now you are. A broken king, he said with quiet bitterness. My crown was lost in betrayal. My men are dead. My enemies believe me gone. I only have my life and my will to fight for justice. For a long moment, she said nothing, searching his face for any sign of falsehood. Then, slowly, she nodded. If you wanted to kill me, you've had ample opportunity. If you wanted to align with my enemies, you'd have done so by now. Instead, you've served me faithfully these weeks. She exhaled, a hint of empathy in her eyes. I cannot imagine the grief you carry. He fought to steady his voice. I swear to you, on the memory of my family, that I mean you no harm. I want the Lannisters broken, the Freys and Boltons punished. If you plan to sail for Westeros, let me be the first to pledge my sword openly. I ask no reward except that you remember the North when you take the throne." She stepped to the balcony railing, the warm breeze lifting tendrils of her hair. The city below was a tapestry of torchlights, the hush of thousands of souls living under her rule. "Cerberus and suspected you might be more than you claimed," she murmured. "But not even he guessed you were Robb Stark." She turned back to him. "I do intend to take the Iron Throne. Not for vanity or ambition alone, but because I believe I can break the wheel that grinds the weak underfoot. If you truly wish to help me do this, then you are welcome at my side." The relief that coursed through him was almost overwhelming. He bowed his head in gratitude, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Your Grace." Yet securing her acceptance was only the first step. In the months that followed, Robb found himself increasingly entangled in the Queen's struggles. The city's old nobility secretly resented Daenerys and sought to undermine her with covert attacks. The sons of the Harpy, masked insurgents, ambushed her soldiers in the dead of night. Through it all, Robb fought with unwavering commitment, forging alliances with the freedmen, earning the trust of the Unsullied who recognized his skill, and assisting Cerberus in rooting out conspirators. Daenerys welcomed him to her war councils. There, he saw her fierce determination tempered by compassion, her willingness to listen to advisors even though her final decisions often surprised them all with their boldness. One day, Daenerys gathered her closest allies, including Robb, Missandei, Grey Worm, and a few others in the Grand Hall. "The Sons of the Harpy plan an uprising," she announced, her voice echoing. "We have discovered evidence of them stockpiling weapons in an abandoned estate. I will not sit idle and let them murder my people." Robb stood with the others, offering his perspective. "We should strike swiftly, Your Grace. Seize the weapons, root out their leaders. Show them that your justice is swift and fair, but that you will not be trifled with." Her lilac eyes flicked to him, and she nodded. "We must also consider the collateral. Innocent people live around that estate." They devised a plan to surround the area at night, blocking escape routes. Robb led one flanking force, while the Unsullied formed the main line. The raid under the moonlight was a flurry of violence, but well organized. Torches illuminated the clash of steel, and masked men shrieked as the disciplined Unsullied ranks hemmed them in. Robb fought in the thick of it, cutting down a pair of assassins who lunged from the shadows. The memory of the Freys and Boltons spurred him on, a cold fury in his heart. When dawn broke, they had captured the conspirators and confiscated a lethal horde of weapons. Daenerys arrived on horseback at first light, her silver-gold hair braided back. With a regal bearing, she surveyed the aftermath. Bodies of masked insurgents lay scattered, some survivors had surrendered. When one prisoner spat curses at her, calling her a foreign whore who would be driven out, she did not flinch. "Take them to the dungeons," she ordered. "They will face trial." Robb watched, marveling at her composure. In Westeros, he had seen lords pass harsh sentence without a second thought. Yet Daenerys balanced severity and mercy in a way that reminded him of the best parts of his father's honor. That morning, as the city stirred to a new day, their eyes met across the scorched courtyard. A faint nod passed between them. They understood each other, both had endured pain and loss, both had come to this foreign land in search of justice and the power to enact it. In the quiet days that followed, Daenerys began asking more about the North, about the ways of the old gods, about the wolves and the snows and the people who lived there. Robb, though reticent, found himself eager to share. He told her of Winterfell's hot springs that kept the castle warm year-round, of the crypts where the ancient kings in the north were laid to rest, of the howling winds across the Wolfswood. She listened intently, sometimes smiling at the tales of his siblings, Sansa's elegance, Arya's wild spirit, Bran's curiosity. There were moments when she'd confide in him her own stories of exile, of wandering with her brother Viserys, of the Dothraki Khalasar and the hardships she faced. She spoke of Khal Drogo, the man who had once been her sun and stars, and of the fire and blood magic that had birthed her dragons. In these shared confidences, an unspoken bond formed, tempered by mutual respect. Yet tension also simmered. Some of Daenerys' advisors resented Robb's influence. Daario Naharis, a brash Sells-word captain who fancied himself the queen's favorite, disliked the northern newcomer who spoke with quiet conviction and rarely indulged in flattery. But Robb made no move to compete for the queen's affection. His focus remained on building a foundation of trust that would eventually lead him home. He explained the importance of the North as part of the Seven Kingdoms, how it was vast and often overlooked by southern rulers. Daenerys, for her part, recognized that to gain the North's loyalty, she needed someone the Northerners respected. Who better than their once beloved king in the North? Among the daily swirl of politics, word came of the gathering threat in Westeros. The Lannisters tightened their grip, placing fierce loyalists in positions of power. The Frey still held the twins, controlling the vital crossing. Roose Bolton had claimed the title warden of the North, with his bastard son, Ramsay, tormenting the northern lords into submission. Darkness, too, gathered beyond the wall, rumors of white shadows and the dead rising. While many southern lords dismissed these tales, Robb knew better. The North's legends were more than bedtime stories. This was the news that finally spurred Daenerys to act decisively on Westeros. She saw that a realm under the Lannisters' rule was not only her rightful kingdom denied, but also a land on the brink of true disaster if the dead truly walked. With Robb at her side, advising her, the Queen convened a grand council. The debate raged: should she strike west at the old world's slave cities that threatened to rebel, or sail for Westeros and claim her birthright? Ultimately, she decided her destiny lay across the sea. The people of Meereen would elect councils to govern themselves, with some of her advisors staying behind to ensure the city's stability. She would take her dragons, her Unsullied, her Dothraki, and any who would swear loyalty to her cause and set sail for the Seven Kingdoms. Preparation took months. Ships were commissioned or seized from slaver fleets, adapted to carry large forces. The Dothraki, who hated the sea, grumbled but followed their Khaleesi. The Unsullied trained relentlessly, disciplined as ever. Freedmen who had sworn loyalty volunteered, though many chose to remain in their new home. Robb worked tirelessly, forging a path for the northern cause. He wrote letters, not sure if they would ever find the hands of surviving northern lords. He urged them to remember the Stark name, to remember the Red Wedding, and to bide their time until the rightful queen arrived with a force strong enough to free them from the Boltons. If any ravens reached them, they would know the king in the north was alive and forging an alliance with the Dragon Queen. At last, the day of departure arrived. A vast fleet crowded the harbor outside Meereen. A motley armada of merchant vessels, war galleys, and captured slaver ships, all bearing the three-headed dragon banner. On the flagship, Daenerys stood at the prow, wearing a cloak of pale blue, her hair braided in the Targaryen fashion of conquest. Robb stood beside her, clad in simple armor, the direwolf token hidden under his tunic. The roars of dragons thundered overhead as the beast soared, weaving patterns across the sky. Thousands cheered on the docks, freedmen calling out thanks and blessings. Robb's heart pounded as the anchor was raised, and sails caught the wind. They were truly headed for Westeros. Home. Would they be welcomed as liberators or face a unified resistance from Cersei Lannister? Were the remnants of House Stark strong enough to rally behind him once more? He stole a glance at Daenerys. She stared westward, eyes aflame with determination. He realized, then, that he was not alone in this. They were kindred spirits in a war for justice, fueled by grief and galvanized by a vision of a better realm. The journey across the narrow sea took weeks. Storms lashed the fleet, forcing them to reroute. Pirate ships tested their resolve but were swiftly destroyed by dragonfire and the might of the Unsullied. Each day brought them closer. On calmer nights, Daenerys would stand on the deck, gazing at the moonlit horizon. Sometimes, Robb joined her, quietly talking about what awaited them, the potential alliances with houses that had once been loyal to Stark, the distrust they might face from houses that had cast their lot with the Iron Throne. They spoke of armies, strategies, the lethal cunning of the Lannisters. But they also spoke of new beginnings, of forging a kingdom that was more just than any before it. When at last the coastline of Dragonstone rose in the distance, its dark castle perched on volcanic rock, Robb felt a rush of conflicting emotions. This was Stannis Baratheon's old seat, once the refuge of Targaryens in ancient times. Now it would serve as Daenerys' foothold on Westeros. They made landfall without resistance. Cersei had not expected them so soon or so boldly. The gates of the fortress opened. The few remaining guards surrendered. Daenerys stepped onto Westerosi soil for the first time since her birth, kneeling to touch the black sands of the beach. Robb stood behind her, inhaling the crisp sea air, tasting the salt and the possibility of change. From Dragonstone, they planned their campaign. Messengers were sent forth to potential allies, ravens dispatched across the north and the Vale, to Dorne and even to the Riverlands, urging all those who chafed under Lannister rule to come. Slowly, uncertainly, Some answered the call. House Tyrell was in turmoil since Marjorie and Loras had been imprisoned by the Faith Militant, a situation Cersei had nurtured before destroying the Great September. The Martells of Dorne nursed a deep hatred for the Lannisters, though their leadership was fractured after Ilaria Sand's questionable coup. Little by little, Daenerys' presence awakened old grudges and hopes. But the Lannisters were not idle. Cersei, the newly crowned queen after Tommen's death, consolidated power. She raised an army with the gold of Highgarden's treasury seized after betraying House Tyrell. She placed the mountain Ser Gregor Clegane as her monstrous enforcer. Euron Greyjoy, newly declared king of the Iron Islands, sought to ally with her, offering his Iron Fleet. It was a tinderbox about to be lit. Robb saw the tension wear on Daenerys. She was far from Meereen, lacking the same control, reliant on forging new alliances in a land that both revered and feared the Targaryen name. To bolster her claim, she announced her intention to meet with local lords to demonstrate she was a just ruler. Robb stood with her at every step, vouching for her desire to protect the North. He realized that if they were to succeed, the North needed to rise up against the Boltons. So he proposed a daring plan: sail north, retake the region from the traitors, and unite it under Daenerys' cause. Once the North was secured, they could march south with combined forces, pressing the Lannisters between the hammer of the North and the anvil of the Targaryen armies. Some of Daenerys' council argued that marching north into the cold was folly when King's Landing lay ripe for an assault. But the Queen listened to Robb's pleas. They needed the North, and not only for its soldiers. They needed the Starks' moral authority. She agreed, but only if the White Walker's rumor was confirmed. Robb explained what little he knew of the Night King and the army of the dead gleaned from uncertain reports. Daenerys was skeptical but did not dismiss the threat outright. If the dead truly marched, ignoring them would be suicidal. Thus began the move northward. They left a token force to defend Dragonstone, while Daenerys, her dragons, the Unsullied, and the Dothraki sailed to White Harbor, the seat of House Manderley. The crossing was treacherous, with violent seas and chilling winds, a stark contrast to the sun-baked waters near Meereen. Robb stood on deck, wrapped in furs he had not worn since leaving Westeros, heart pounding at the thought of returning to the land of his birth. The first glimpse of the North's rocky shores brought tears to his eyes. He was home, though not in triumph as he once imagined. White Harbor's harbor bristled with tension as the ships arrived. But House Manderley, known for loyalty to the Starks, cautiously opened the gates. Lord Wyman Manderley, a large man with keen eyes, hobbled out to greet Daenerys and Robb in person. He recognized Robb at once, tears streaming down his face as he fell to one knee. "My king," he breathed, voice thick. "We thought you lost. All the North thought you lost." Robb clasped the Lord's hand, voice wavering. "It's good to see you, my lord. We have much to do." Lord Wyman turned to Daenerys, warily studying the dragon banners and the foreign warriors. But seeing Robb stand by her side, he inclined his head. "Any friend of the Starks is a friend of White Harbor. You are welcome, your grace." The next weeks became a whirlwind of diplomatic and military maneuvers. Ravens flew to northern houses carrying Robb's personal seal. Some houses rallied immediately, eager to cast off the Bolton yoke. Others were cautious, waiting to see if the rumors of Robb's survival were another trap. Meanwhile, Ramsay Bolton terrorized those who resisted, skinning defiant lords alive. Winter had descended in earnest, snows piling on the roads, turning travel into a grueling ordeal. But the Targaryen fleet in White Harbor remained safe in the port's natural shelter, and Daenerys' dragons, though unhappy in the cold, soared above the gloom, striking terror into the hearts of any who doubted her might. Robb led scouting missions, braving the icy wilderness to contact houses that had gone silent. In one such mission, he discovered a small force of Karstark men who had not yet bent the knee to the Boltons. They wept at the sight of him, recalling how their house had once followed him south. Some had lost fathers and brothers at the Red Wedding. Their grief turned to resolve when they realized he lived and fought on. They pledged their swords anew, and Robb led them back to the growing northern host near White Harbor. Daenerys traveled as well, venturing out with a modest retinue to witness the North's harsh reality. She saw villagers huddled in huts, half-starved, battered by the elements. She saw Bolton men terrorizing the countryside, taking food and supplies by force. She saw the heartbreak on faces that once knew the pride of the Starks. Moved by their plight, she distributed what provisions she could spare, even as her own army needed supplies. Gradually, the Northerners began to see that the Dragon Queen might be different from the Southern despots who had so often dismissed them as savages. Word reached them that Roose Bolton was assembling his army at Winterfell, determined to maintain his hold on the castle. He had the support of the Freys, who controlled the twins. Cersei, not entirely trusting the Boltons, sent only a token force, but it was enough to bolster them. The confrontation loomed. Robb gazed into the distant snowstorms, remembering the courtyard where he once trained with his siblings, the crypts where his forefathers lay. Winterfell. He was determined to reclaim it. If he had to face Roose Bolton himself, steel in hand, he would. Before marching on Winterfell, Daenerys called a war council in White Harbor's Great Hall. Around the table sat the North's newly rallied lords, the Manderleys, the Karstarks, a grim-faced Lady Lyanna Mormont whose boldness belied her youth, and the Targaryen generals Grey Worm, a Dothraki Khal named Kotho, Ser Barristan, and Robb. They planned a two-pronged attack. Robb would lead the northern forces across the wintry plains, rallying more houses on the way, while Daenerys would circle around with her dragons and a portion of the Unsullied to cut off any retreat. The Dothraki, adept at open-field maneuvers, would harass Bolton's supply lines. Robb stood at the table, voice steady. "We strike swiftly, but carefully. The Boltons know the North better than any outsider. Yet they do not understand loyalty. We do. The people remember the Starks. They will rise." Daenerys placed her hand on the table, her eyes meeting his. "And if Roose Bolton stands behind the walls of Winterfell?" Robb's lips thinned. "Winterfell is not just a fortress, it's our ancestral home. Its people will not stand for a Bolton occupation. We have to be mindful of the innocents inside. But we cannot let the Boltons remain. If we must besiege the castle, we do so. This time, we will not be caught unaware by betrayal." The final stretch to Winterfell was brutal. Snow blanketed the land, turning rivers into icy barriers. Supplies ran thin. The Dothraki, ill-suited to the cold, chafed and complained. Yet Daenerys flew overhead on the largest dragon, Drogon, spurring morale among her troops. The northern lords, seeing a Targaryen queen braving their infamous winter, found new respect for her dedication. Roose Bolton attempted ambushes, sending out flanking parties. But Robb anticipated them, using scouts and his knowledge of the terrain to counter. Each small victory bolstered the northern host. More houses joined, men and women once loyal to House Stark who had lain low under Bolton rule. Soon, they arrived at the outskirts of Winterfell. From a ridge, Robb looked upon the familiar battlements rising from the snowy plain. His breath caught in his throat. Memories assailed him, childhood laughter, festival days, the warm hearths in the Great Hall. Now, Bolton banners hung from the walls, a flayed man in stark, cruel depiction. A pang of grief swelled in him at the sight of the defiled castle. The Bolton forces were entrenched, but they had not expected such a vast coalition of northerners allied with a Targaryen queen. Their lines wavered under the combined assault of the Dothraki riding in swift arcs and the discipline of the Unsullied. All the while, men loyal to the Starks battered the gates. Ramsay Bolton emerged with a twisted grin, shouting foul insults at Robb. The memory of Ramsay's atrocities, the flaying, the torture, stoked the fires of hate in every northern heart. The young bastard was cunning, but not enough to outmatch the tide of outraged northerners. In a swirl of snow and blood, the battle raged around Winterfell's walls. Daenerys, astride Drogon, unleashed gouts of dragon fire on the Bolton catapults, the heat melting the snow in wide arcs, scalding the earth. Men scattered, terrified by the living embodiment of ancient Targaryen might. Meanwhile, Robb led a charge through a breach in the outer wall. In that chaotic moment, steel clashed, men screamed and died. The smell of burning flesh and the churn of muddy snow threatened to overwhelm him, but he pressed onward. Ramsay appeared, loosing arrows into the fray, cackling as men fell. In the gloom of swirling flakes, Robb found himself face to face with the bastard of Bolton. Rage burned in Ramsay's eyes, but there was fear too. Robb swung his sword in an arc and Ramsay dodged, twisting to rake a dagger across Robb's arm. The pain burned hot, but Robb did not slow. Memories of the Red Wedding, the torment inflicted upon his family, the flayed bodies that Ramsay so enjoyed displaying, everything fueled him. Their blades met with ringing force. At last, Robb forced Ramsay's dagger aside and drove his sword through the bastard's chest. The man's eyes went wide with disbelief, a final choking sputter on his lips before he slid off the blade, crumpling into the bloody snow. Roose Bolton's men, leaderless and demoralized, either surrendered or fled. Some tried to retreat into the castle keep, but the Unsullied poured through the gates, capturing them. Roose himself was nowhere to be seen, rumored to have fled south. Winterfell was theirs. Robb stood, panting in the courtyard, watching the last vestiges of Bolton resistance collapse. All around him, northern soldiers wept or cheered, hugging one another. The home they lost, the seat of House Stark, was reclaimed. Daenerys landed Drogon with a thunderous impact, the beast's massive wings stirring clouds of snow. She dismounted gracefully, though she looked exhausted from the strain of controlling the dragon in such frigid conditions. Robb turned to her, adrenaline still coursing. Their eyes met, no words were needed. They had done this together. The Stark banners, stored away in secret by loyal stewards, were soon unfurled atop the battlements. Men knelt, tears in their eyes, as the direwolf sigil waved once more over Winterfell. In the aftermath, they moved quickly to restore order. The wounded were tended, the dead honored. Within the Great Hall, Daenerys held court, receiving the oaths of many northern lords who pledged fealty to her cause as the rightful queen and to Robb Stark as their liege in the north. The old place felt both familiar and strange to Robb, memories colliding with the reality of war's devastation. He took a moment to kneel before the hearth where he had once sat with his siblings. He whispered their names, feeling the warmth of the old gods in the flicker of the flames. That night, for the first time since crossing the Twins, Robb allowed himself a moment of solace. He walked the corridors, checking the rooms. Some were damaged by fire or Bolton neglect, but the heart of Winterfell still beat. He made his way to the godwood where the ancient weirwood tree stood with its carved face. Snow coated the red leaves. The quiet was profound, broken only by the distant crackle of torches. Robb knelt at the base of the tree, pressing his hand against its trunk. Tears slid down his cheeks as he prayed to the old gods, thanking them for this moment, for the chance to reclaim his birthright and avenge his family. He sensed a presence behind him. Turning, he saw Daenerys standing at the edge of the clearing, wrapped in a thick cloak. Her breath formed a mist in the cold. She stepped closer, her expression gentler than he'd ever seen. "I wanted to see this place," she said softly, looking at the weirwood. "I've heard so much about the godwood of Winterfell." He rose, his cheeks cold with tears. "It's the heart of our faith here in the north. My father prayed here." His voice quavered slightly. She looked at him, sympathy shining in her violet eyes. "I've never had such a place. I was always a guest in foreign lands, worshipping foreign gods. But I respect this." Together, they stood beneath the rustling leaves, letting silence settle, letting the significance of the victory and the sorrow of all that had been lost wash over them. A swirl of snow drifted around them, and for a moment, Robb recalled the first time he had come here as a boy, small and awed by the silent tree. Now he was a grown man, scarred and changed by war and betrayal, standing beside a Targaryen queen who commanded dragons. The tapestry of fate was strange indeed. Daenerys turned to him, speaking quietly. "I know what it is to lose your birthright, to be forced into exile, but we have taken a step toward restoring yours. And now you stand not only as Robb Stark, but as the man who helped me secure a foothold in Westeros." He nodded, his gaze flicking to the old face carved into the tree. The mouth seemed to be smiling, or perhaps that was just the dancing shadows. "The North needed you. We still do. And if I have any right to speak for them, we will fight for you, my queen, until you sit the Iron Throne." She let out a quiet breath. "I hope when that day comes, I'll prove worthy of the trust you and your people have given me." She paused, meeting his eyes. "And perhaps you will not have to be just the young wolf anymore, but the rightful warden of the North, or king in the North, if that is your wish." He looked down, emotion thick in his chest. "All I ever wanted was to protect my family and my people. If the North can remain safe, if we can honor our own traditions, then we stand with you. My father taught me that the king who rules best is the one who remembers his duty, not his glory." She smiled faintly. "I hope I can learn from his wisdom." The wind rustled the tree branches and a flurry of snow drifted past. "There's still so much to do. The Lannisters will not surrender quietly. And if the rumors of the dead marching beyond the wall are true, our battles are far from over." Robb's gaze shifted to the north, beyond the castle walls, beyond the domain of mortal kings. "Yes, we'll have to unite this realm if we stand a chance. I fear the worst is yet to come." In the days that followed, the North rallied in truth. More houses emerged from the shadows, bringing arms and supplies to Winterfell. Daenerys' presence in the Great Hall, with dragons perched in the courtyard, cemented the alliance. Ravens flew out once again, calling on the rest of Westeros to recognize the Targaryen queen's claim. Some houses, wary of Lannister tyranny, began to send envoys. But the real threat loomed further north, where the wall stood as the last bastion against the horrors stirring in the land of always winter. Scouts brought word of sightings, whites and white walkers. A cold beyond measure. Robb threw himself into preparing the North for a war none of them could truly comprehend. He took stock of the grain stores, ordered blacksmiths to forge weapons of dragonglass once he learned from old records that the material could harm the undead. Daenerys, for her part, was torn between pressing south to seize King's Landing or confronting this new enemy. Ultimately, her compassion and sense of duty prevailed. She could not claim the throne only to inherit a land overrun by the dead. She announced that she would march north if necessary, dragonfire at the ready to stand against the Night King. Thus, a new chapter began for them both. The king in the north, who was meant to die at the Red Wedding, stood alive, battered but unbroken, forging an alliance with the Dragon Queen, whose fate had once hung by a thread in the Dothraki Sea. Their partnership carried the hopes of the north and the promise of Targaryen restoration. And though the future remained uncertain, though countless foes still waited with sharpened blades or nightmares from beyond the wall, one truth shone clear: they had found a bond forged by shared sorrow and unwavering resolve, a bond that might just save the realm, or remake it entirely in fire and ice. The bitter winds raked across the battlements of Winterfell, but within its halls, the warmth of unity burned bright. As ravens departed into the gray sky, bearing pleas and portents of war, Robb Stark stood beside Daenerys Targaryen, gazing northward. Together, they would face the storms to come, bound by a destiny neither had ever anticipated but both embraced with a fierce, unyielding hope. Robb Stark stood in the godwood long after Daenerys retired for the night, feeling the hush of the ancient place weigh upon his shoulders. Torchlight flickered against the carved face of the weirwood, casting dancing shadows along the red-streaked trunk. His breath billowed in white puffs in the freezing northern air, but the cold felt comforting, a reminder that he was home in ways he once feared he would never be. Snow clung to his boots, and in that stillness he let himself think of all that had happened. Months ago, he'd been in exile, believed dead by friend and foe alike. Now he had returned to Winterfell not as the conquering king in the north, but as a man tempered by betrayal and strengthened by new purpose. He thought of Daenerys Targaryen, how her dragons had roared above these ancient ramparts, how their combined forces had driven the Boltons out. In the quiet gloom, he could still hear echoes of steel, the clash of swords that had settled one small piece of a much larger war. At last, he trudged back into the castle, where corridors still bore the scars of Bolton abuse. Some walls were scorched and furniture had been hacked apart for fuel. Even so, the old stone of Winterfell felt alive again, as if the very soul of the fortress recognized its rightful lord's presence. Over the following weeks, a tireless effort began to restore what had been ruined. Workers shored up collapsed sections, carpenters repaired rooftops, and stonemasons replaced cracked flagstones. Robb moved among them, offering a hand or a word of encouragement. He never forgot that these were his people, men and women who had once looked to House Stark for guidance and protection. He saw Daenerys often, though their responsibilities kept them apart for most of the day. She presided over councils in the Great Hall, conferring with lords both old and newly arrived. Northerners approached her with reserved curiosity. She was, after all, an outsider. Some gave her guarded respect because of her dragons and might, while others were won over by the fact that Robb Stark vouched for her personally. In return, Daenerys made every effort to learn their names, to speak with them about their lands and families, and to show them that she was not some foreign conqueror come to loot the north. Robb was grateful for her willingness to adapt, and he sensed a slow but growing acceptance among the North's leadership. Still, tensions simmered. A few bannermen whispered that House Stark should stand alone, that no Targaryen queen could truly understand the North. But each time such mutterings rose, the sight of a dragon scorching the sky above the castle or the memory of Bolton cruelty helped quell them. If a unified front was needed against the Lannisters, and especially against the dead that many believed lurked beyond the wall, then forging trust was paramount. Night after night, couriers arrived from distant holdfasts, bringing small contingents of men or messages pledging cautious support. The war in the north was not over, but the first great victory was theirs. Rumors persisted that Roose Bolton had escaped south, possibly through the neck or by some cunning route. The Freys, too, were still entrenched at the Twins, controlling that narrow crossing of the Green Fork. Robb knew that to fight a two-front war, one against the dead in the north and one against the Lannisters in the south, he and Daenerys would have to secure the loyalty of key houses and isolate their enemies. The question remained how best to proceed. There was also the matter of the Vale. Littlefinger, the cunning Lord Protector, commanded the Knights of the Vale, and no one could predict how he would respond to the rise of Daenerys and the resurgence of Robb Stark. Day by day, however, immediate concerns pressed them. Winter had grown fierce. Snowdrifts climbed to a man's waist, and the roads turned treacherous. Settlements distant from Winterfell reported sightings of ragged wights stumbling through frozen woods, an unsettling confirmation of the rumors swirling about the undead threat. Having reclaimed his seat, Robb felt the weight of centuries of stark duty pressing upon him. If the army of the dead truly marched, saving the realm might require more than just winning battles in the south. It might require every living soul's cooperation. Daenerys, too, began to speak less of King's Landing and more of the threat beyond the wall, determined not to let an ancient evil destroy the kingdom she meant to claim. Late one evening, Robb gathered his closest northern allies in a small solar lit by a roaring fire. Daenerys was present, along with Ser Barristan, Grey Worm, Lady Lyanna Mormont, Lord Wyman Manderly, and a handful of other staunch supporters. Candles flickered over maps and scattered pieces of parchment. Lady Lyanna, barely into her adolescence yet formidable in bearing, wore a serious scowl. She tapped a small marker representing Bear Island. My lady mother taught me that an enemy is not always the one brandishing a sword at you. The cold, the storms, the hunger, these can kill just as swiftly. We must be certain our people have food and shelter. Any battle plan is worthless if our folk freeze or starve. Daenerys, her silver hair braided loosely, nodded. I've arranged shipments from White Harbor. We brought provisions from Essos as well, though the sea crossing is difficult this time of year. We'll share what we can. Lord Manderly, rubbing his thick hands together, offered a nod of approval. My warehouses in White Harbor can spare a good deal. But we must also remember that if we plan to march north and meet the threat head-on, it will mean fighting in conditions that favor the dead. Some lords might prefer to fortify behind castle walls. That could lead to a scattered defense. Robb exhaled, his gaze flicking to the flame dancing on the hearth. We can't face the dead castle by castle. They'll overwhelm us eventually. I've heard from Tormund Giantsbane, a wildling chieftain at the wall, that the army of the dead is massive. He says the wildlings have retreated south of the wall already. The Night's Watch alone can't hold them back. He glanced at Daenerys. We need to see for ourselves. The threat is too large to rely on rumors alone. Daenerys caught his eye, understanding dawning. You're suggesting we travel north to the wall, perhaps beyond it? Robb answered. A small party, a scouting mission to confirm what exactly we face. If we bring back proof, it could unify all the living houses behind us, north and south. No lord will side with the Lannisters if they truly believe the dead are coming for us all. Ser Barristan frowned. It's a risk, your grace. A grave one. The dangers beyond the wall are legend and many men have lost their lives there. Daenerys folded her hands, considering. I have 3 dragons, Ser Barristan. If the worst comes, they can serve as an advantage in that cold land. But I won't be reckless. We must prepare carefully. This alliance we've built cannot falter because I make a foolish move. Robb looked around at the gathered faces, feeling the stir of old excitement in his veins. Once he had rallied the northern lords to march south for vengeance and justice. This felt different, heavier, because the stakes were far higher. Yet he also felt a glimmer of hope. He had Daenerys with him, and her presence at Winterfell had already changed the tides of possibility. We won't take a large force, he said. A handful of skilled fighters, men I trust to face the unknown. Perhaps a few Dothraki riders, a group of Unsullied, and some of my northern veterans. We'll see the threat for ourselves and return to warn the realm. Thus, a plan began to form, a perilous expedition beyond the wall, relying on the fortifications of Castle Black and the assistance of the Night's Watch. Lady Lyanna, despite her youth, insisted on contributing Mormont warriors. Lord Manderly agreed to send provisions. Grey Worm volunteered to lead the Unsullied detachment, but Robb persuaded him to remain at Winterfell to keep order. Instead, he asked a smaller group of Unsullied to accompany him, men tested by the harsh climates of Essos who would adapt well to orders in a foreign land. Several days of preparation passed, during which Daenerys made arrangements for the governance of Winterfell in her absence. She would fly with Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion while the rest of the party traveled north overland. The day they set out was cold and bright. A brittle winter sun glinted off freshly fallen snow as the expedition departed Winterfell's gates. Robb rode at the head, wearing a thick fur cloak and carrying the sword once meant for his father's heir. Ice had been lost to the Lannisters, melted down, but he had a sturdy longsword of Valyrian steel recovered from a ruin in Moat Cailin, courtesy of a loyal retainer. At his side rode Daenerys upon a magnificent white steed, leading a small retinue that included Ser Barristan, a cadre of Unsullied under a captain named Belias, and a group of seasoned northern rangers who knew the terrain better than any. They left behind a significant garrison at Winterfell under the command of other loyal lords, for the Boltons or Freys might still attempt an attack. The columns of riders wound through the snow-blanketed countryside like a dark thread weaving northward. Travel was grueling. The roads had iced over, making progress slow. Daenerys marveled at the stark beauty of the north, the pale sunlight glinting on frozen rivers, the forests of tall pines frosted with snow, but she also felt the cruelty of the cold. The Dothraki riders who accompanied them shivered in their furs and cursed the land that forced them to ride over slippery ground instead of open plains. Dragons circled overhead, occasionally diving to snatch a hare or deer. At night, the party huddled in makeshift camps, lighting large fires to fend off the biting chill. Robb often found himself discussing strategy with Daenerys as the wind howled outside their tents, both of them mindful that the deeper they went into the north, the greater the danger would become. One evening, when the moonlight reflected off the snow in a ghostly glow, Daenerys stood outside her tent, gazing into the star-filled sky. Robb joined her, footsteps crunching in the fresh drifts. The dragons had settled nearby, their warm breath creating plumes of steam. She glanced at him, her face half hidden by the woolen hood. "I've never seen nights like these," she said softly. In Meereen, even in the darkest hour, the heat lingered. "Here, the air is so cold it feels alive." Robb nodded, seeing the faint sparkle of frost on her eyelashes. "It's beautiful but unforgiving. My father used to say that the north sharpens people into what they're meant to be. There's no room for pretense in a land where winter can kill you." She shivered slightly, drawing her cloak closer. "I suppose that's one reason you northerners value honor so highly. You've little time for anything else." He thought of Ned Stark, of Catelyn and his siblings, how their lessons were shaped by this exact environment. A pang of longing went through him. "Yes," he said quietly. "I want the rest of Westeros to understand this place, to know what it stands for. Maybe that's another reason I want to show you this beyond the wall, even though it terrifies me." She regarded him curiously. "Terrifies you?" He let out a breath. "We were always taught the wall was the end of the known world. Beyond it lay wildling raiders, giants, and worse. Now we know there's something even more dreadful. But if seeing it unites the living, perhaps it's worth the risk." They shared a brief silence, the wind hissing over the plain. Then Daenerys spoke in a measured tone. "I've faced slavery, Dothraki khals, warlocks with dark magic, slavers who would have crucified me. But this is something else. An enemy that doesn't reason or speak, that only kills and consumes. I suppose I'm afraid too." Robb gently touched her arm. "Fear can guide us as long as we don't let it consume us. In the morning, we press on." Press on they did, moving north day by day until finally they reached the wall's colossal expanse. Even Daenerys, who had beheld the grandeur of Meereen and the vastness of Essos, seemed momentarily awed by the towering barrier of ice that stretched across the continent. Its frozen ramparts gleamed under the pale sun, a silent sentinel shaped over centuries. At the foot of the wall stood Castle Black. Black banners drooped, stiff with frost. A lonely horn sounded as their party approached. Men in black cloaks peered down from the walls. When Robb announced himself, they opened the gates, albeit with caution. The Night's Watch had heard rumors of his survival but had not expected such a formidable retinue, or dragons perched among the drifts, letting out rumbling growls that echoed off the ice. The acting Lord Commander, a haggard man named Wick Pike, received them in the cold main hall. Torches provided meager heat, but at least it was shelter from the biting wind. Robb explained their purpose. They sought passage beyond the wall to confirm the threat of the undead. Pike's face tightened. "Aye, you'll find it," he said grimly. "We've already lost brothers to those things. They come in the night, silent as the grave. We can't hold them off forever." Daenerys listened intently, her expression grave. "How many have you seen?" Pike shrugged helplessly. "Dozens, hundreds. They're scattered at times, but some bigger horde is out there in the wastes. We've had ravens from Eastwatch saying the ice is restless. Wildlings speak of an army led by creatures with blue eyes that command the dead like puppets." Robb and Daenerys exchanged glances, their resolve strengthened. They would travel with a small group of Night's Watch Rangers, including a fiery red-haired wildling named Tormund Giantsbane, who had come south of the wall but volunteered to lead them back north. Daenerys arranged for some of the dragons to remain near Castle Black. Only Drogon would venture beyond the wall with her. She wanted 2 dragons in reserve in case anything went awry. That night, as they prepared to set out, Tormund sought them at the fireside. The wildling towered over most men, red beard bristling with icicles. He gave Daenerys a respectful nod, then turned to Robb. "I remember your father," Tormund said, eyes flicking across Robb's face. "Ned Stark. He had that look of a man who carried the whole north on his back." You look the same. Robb offered a faint smile. I'm honored you'd say so. Tormund barked a laugh. It ain't necessarily a compliment, boy. Carrying the Northlike that can break you. But I see you've got a queen with dragons, so maybe you'll manage. He glanced at Daenerys. Never thought I'd see a Targaryen beyond the wall. But if you're as tough as your beasts, maybe you'll survive. She inclined her head in acknowledgement. We're all in this together, Tormund. We need your help. Tormund said, or else we're all dead men walking. Before dawn, they mounted up. Daenerys rode Drogon overhead, casting a hulking silhouette against the pale sky. Robb, Tormund, Ser Barristan, and a handful of rangers ventured through the creaking gate in the wall, stepping onto the vast tundra beyond. The wind cut across them like a blade. Ice crystals swirled in the air, sparkling under the feeble sunlight. Their breath formed clouds, and they advanced slowly, wary of every drift, every patch of treacherous ice. Hour after hour, they pressed on, passing through bleak landscapes of snow-laden forests. Occasionally, Drogon swooped low to check on them, the wind from his wings lifting snow in swirling gusts. The rangers scanned the perimeter with crossbows and torches at the ready. The hush felt too complete, no birds, no animals, not even the distant calls of wolves. It was as though the world itself held its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. That night, they made a small camp in the shelter of a rocky outcrop. Daenerys settled Drogon close by, the dragon's body heat offering a surprising respite from the cold. Tormund and a ranger named Dolorous Ed scouted the perimeter while Robb helped Ser Barristan and the Unsullied set up a defensive circle. Sparks flew as they lit fires, the flames licking hungrily at the darkness. Daenerys sat with Robb and Barristan in a crude windbreak formed by half-buried boulders. The queen's face was thoughtful, her expression tense. They had only just begun to discuss the next day's route when a sudden shout rang out in the near distance. Everyone grabbed their weapons, hearts pounding, and rushed toward the sound. Tormund emerged from behind a spindly copse of frozen trees, dragging a limp figure by the collar. It was a wildling woman, her face contorted in terror. Her eyes were wide but had that unnatural pale glaze that Robb had heard described in hushed tones. She moved with stiff, jerky motions, her fingers curled into claws. Her mouth gaped open in a silent snarl. She attacked Ed, Tormund growled. Nearly clawed his face off. Seems we found one of your whites already. A chill crawled down Robb's spine. This was no tale or rumor, the dead were real and they were here. The white hissed, thrashing. Then, with a strength that defied its small frame, it broke free of Tormund's grip, lunging at Daenerys. Ser Barristan intervened in a flash, driving his sword into the white's chest, but it didn't falter. It snarled, clawing at him with cold, rigid fingers. Robb dashed forward and swung his Valyrian steel blade, severing the white's head cleanly. Even that did not end it completely, the limbs still twitching. It took a torch touch to the remains to finally quell the unholy life that animated it. Silence followed, broken only by their breathing and the crackle of flames. Daenerys stared down at the burnt, twisted fragments, her expression a mix of horror and determination. We have our proof, she said softly, eyes shining with a cold fire. We must bring this knowledge back to Castle Black, back to every corner of the realm. Before the night was out, more whites prowled at the edges of their camp, eyes glowing eerily in the dark. Drogon's roars resounded, and jets of dragonfire lit the snow in harsh orange flares. Robb and the others fought fiercely, steel ringing amid the howling wind. It was a frantic series of clashes, the undead surging forward in small packs as if testing the living. More than once, they had to rely on Drogon's flames to hold them at bay. By dawn, they had killed or driven off the attackers, but the cost was high. Several rangers lay dead or wounded, and a pall of dread hung over the survivors. Robb had known it would be dangerous, but seeing the whites in such numbers and so relentless deepened his fear of what lay elsewhere in the frozen wastes. The next day, battered and shaken, they withdrew toward the wall, not daring to venture further. Daenerys flew ahead on Drogon, scouting to ensure their path was clear. Ser Barristan, injured by a white's claws, rode grimly, refusing help except for a few bandages. Tormund's face was set in stubborn resolve, though Robb sensed the wildling shared the same dread. The dead were no longer the stuff of legend, they were a force that could snuff out entire armies if left unchecked. Once back at Castle Black, Daenerys and Robb told Lord Commander Pike what they had seen. Even the hardened men of the Night's Watch paled at the descriptions of the Whites' ferocity. No one doubted that far larger hordes lurked beyond the horizon, waiting for the Night King's command. The time for subtlety was over. Word must be sent throughout the Seven Kingdoms, the threat beyond the wall was real and imminent. Daenerys penned urgent letters bearing the royal sigil of House Targaryen, while Robb attached his own seal as the returned king in the north. They implored every great house, every minor lord to unite against the oncoming storm. If the realm remained divided, all would be lost. Couriers departed Castle Black on swift horses, braving the winter roads. Daenerys dispatched one of her dragons to fly south with missives addressed to major castles, an undeniable demonstration of the seriousness of their plea. With heavy hearts, they journeyed back to Winterfell. The castle greeted them with warm fires and relief at their return, but the mood was tense. Northerners had always taken the possibility of the dead more seriously than their southern counterparts, but even they were shaken by the confirmation that the undead roamed in such numbers. Daenerys wasted no time summoning the lords still present to the Great Hall. She stood beneath the direwolf banners that once again graced those walls, recounting the horrors they had witnessed. Robb stood beside her, silent testimony to every word. "I will march my armies north," she declared, her voice echoing over the assembled. "We must hold the wall if we can. If the Night King breaches it, there may be no stopping him." Lord Cerwyn, a young man barely older than Robb had been at the War of the Five Kings, stood and bowed. "My men are yours, your grace. We will not let these creatures pass." Others rose to pledge their swords. The Mormonts, the Glovers, the Manderleys, they all rallied behind Daenerys's call, heartened by Robb Stark's living presence. But for all the pledges, resources were limited. Feeding a large army in the dead of winter was an enormous challenge. The stables and granaries were already stretched. Daenerys ordered an immediate effort to scour the coasts for fish and sea trade. The lords were told to slaughter excess livestock if need be, preserving the meat with salt and smoke. Every measure to stave off starvation was employed. In time, ravens and riders returned from the south with mixed news. Some lords, like the Tyrells, had been neutralized when Highgarden fell to Lannister control. The Martells and Dorne were in chaos after Illyria Sand's fractious rule. The Vale, under Littlefinger, sent a polite but non-committal response, offering neither men nor explicit denial of help. The Riverlands were fragmented due to the Frey grip on the twins. Most disturbing of all was the word from King's Landing. Cersei Lannister publicly dismissed the warnings as northern superstition. She branded Daenerys a foreign usurper and Robb Stark a pretender who should have died at the twins. Euron Greyjoy's Iron Fleet patrolled the seas in Lannister service, preventing any easy approach by water. Still, a few houses, quietly disgusted by Cersei, sent messages of support or at least willingness to parley. Daenerys believed an alliance might be brokered if she and Robb traveled south in person to present the captured evidence of a White, if they could find a way to bring one into the lion's den without losing their own heads. Robb was torn. The plan could unify the realm or lead them into a Lannister trap. He knew the risk but also recognized the necessity. If a demonstration of the undead was the only way to force Cersei into a truce, they might have no choice. After long debate, they decided on a bold course. Capture a White and bring it south to show every major house that the living had no time left for petty squabbles. For the capture, they would need a small team again, an infiltration beyond the wall to snatch a White from the edges of the undead army. Robb cursed the necessity. He had only just returned from a mission that claimed northern lives. But it seemed the only path. They could not expect the entire realm to unite against an unseen foe. Ser Barristan, still nursing wounds, offered to go, but Daenerys refused to risk his life again. Grey Worm and a handful of Unsullied volunteered. Tormund agreed, calling it a fool's errand but acknowledging that desperate times demanded desperate measures. Robb prepared to ride once more, though every part of him loathed leaving Winterfell. Daenerys insisted on flying overhead on Drogon for support, but Robb argued that she might be safer at Winterfell, coordinating the war effort. They quarreled quietly in her solar, the tension of so many battles and decisions weighing on them. Snow drifted past the window as they debated. "I am your queen," she reminded him, frustration in her voice. "I will not sit idle in comfort while you risk your life beyond the wall. You're also the best hope for the living to unite," Robb countered. "If something happens to you, this entire alliance falls apart. Let me do this. I know the North. I've fought in these snows all my life." Her eyes flashed with anger, but also with concern. "I've lost so many people I care for, Robb. My handmaidens, my blood riders, even Jorah Mormont who betrayed me once but later tried to redeem himself. I can't lose you too. Not when this alliance depends on your leadership." A hush settled between them. Robb swallowed hard. realizing just how much he'd come to value her. If he were honest, it went beyond the alliance. They had come to trust each other in ways neither had expected. He softened his tone. "We both have duties. I won't pretend I don't fear what we face. But this is my responsibility. Let me bear it." She studied him for a long moment, anguish in her eyes. Finally, she nodded, letting out a breath that sounded suspiciously like a sigh of relief mingled with fear. "Then go. But take every precaution, and I will fly in if your situation grows dire. Promise me you'll send word the moment you need help." He touched her hand gently. "I will. And if luck stands by us, we'll capture our proof and bring it south. We'll force Cersei to see the truth, or we'll show it to the lords who still have sense." On a crisp morning laden with gray clouds, the small party set out yet again from Winterfell for the Wall. This time, Daenerys remained at the castle, orchestrating supply lines and preparing the realm's defenses. Robb rode at the head, flanked by Tormund, Grey Worm, the handful of Unsullied, and about a dozen northern rangers. They traveled light, mindful that speed and stealth would be their best allies. At Castle Black, Lord Commander Pike wished them well with grave eyes. "We'll do what we can from here," he said, "but I fear you won't have time to tarry." That prophecy proved true all too soon. Once they crossed the wall, it was clear that undead incursions had grown bolder. They found pockets of whites ravaging small wildling camps or wandering aimlessly across the tundra. The howling wind carried the faint stench of decay. Robb's group was forced to pick their way carefully, occasionally skirmishing to dispatch lone whites. They advanced deeper than before, seeking a vantage from which to spot a large group. The plan was to isolate a single white, bind it, and retreat before the rest could overwhelm them. It was a plan fraught with peril. Tormund guided them across ice-slick ridges and valleys of snow so deep that horses would have floundered. They'd left the mounts behind at Castle Black, relying on trudging foot travel. Cold sank into their bones, and the days grew short, the sun offering only a few hours of gray light. The biting chill tested even the Unsullied, who endured in stoic silence. Robb's breath was ragged in the frosty air, but he drove himself forward, fueled by the knowledge of what was at stake. After days of tense searching, they found a small group of whites trailing behind a contingent of White Walkers, tall, gaunt figures with glowing blue eyes. The watchers from a rocky outcrop counted at least 4 White Walkers on skeletal horses, leading a ragged throng of the dead. There were too many for a direct confrontation. Robb signaled for them to lie low as the silent procession passed below. He felt the chill of them even from a distance. The White Walkers emanated an eerie presence, as though the very air froze around them. When the group had nearly passed, one white, a lumbering husk of a wildling man, straggled at the rear. Tormund nudged Robb, pointing. This was their chance. They waited until the White Walkers and the bulk of the whites drifted out of sight into a shallow ravine. Then, quick as they could, they descended the slope and rushed the lone white, netting it with chains hastily crafted from Castle Black's supplies. The white shrieked and flailed, snapping its jaws. Robb, Grey Worm, and 2 Unsullied wrestled it to the ground, wrapping it in thick ropes soaked in pitch. But the white's cries attracted the attention of the White Walkers ahead. A chilling howl echoed across the frozen expanse. The watchers on the ridge saw the tall figures wheel their undead horses. Robb's stomach turned to ice. "Run!" he barked, and they hauled the captured white, still snapping and writhing, up the slope. Tormund led the way, forging a path back toward an area of broken rocks that might offer some defensive terrain. Before they reached cover, the White Walkers descended on them with terrible swiftness. The wind seemed to die, replaced by the hiss of ancient, malevolent power. The ground crackled, forming ice crystals that spread unnaturally. One White Walker led a pack of whites forward, shrieking in hunger. Robb and his companions formed a ring, mindful not to lose their prisoner. Grey Worm's spear struck the first white down, but more followed. Tormund hacked at them with a broadaxe. Robb swung his Valyrian steel sword at a White Walker that approached, the tall figure sneering with otherworldly contempt. The swords met with a resounding crack that sent vibrations up Robb's arms. A normal blade would have shattered, but Valyrian steel held strong, slicing through the White Walker's ice sword. The other disintegrated into shards of frosty dust, shattering into the wind. Yet for every victory, more undead surged forward. The party found themselves quickly encircled by an ever-growing throng. The only hope was to hold out until Daenerys arrived, or until they could break through and run. Their lines tightened, each man fighting desperately. An Unsullied soldier was dragged down, screaming as whites tore at him. Another ranger fell to a White Walker's frozen blade. With every second, the situation worsened. Suddenly, a fierce roar split the sky. Drogon came hurtling from the clouds, Daenerys on his back. Flames spewed in a wide arc, torching whites in a blaze of orange. Men shouted. In relief, she had come, defying the plan to remain behind. Drogon's talons tore into the undead, scattering them like dried leaves. But the White Walkers advanced without fear, ice lances forming in their pale hands. One launched a spear of frost that soared upward. Daenerys directed Drogon aside, but the spear glanced along the dragon's flank, drawing blood and a monstrous roar of pain. Spurred by adrenaline, Robb seized the moment of chaos to command a withdrawal. "Fall back!" he shouted, pointing to higher ground. They dragged the thrashing White with them. Daenerys swooped low, clearing a path with another jet of dragonfire. The White Walkers regrouped, continuing their relentless pursuit. Robb's group scrambled up an icy rise. At the top, they realized with horror that the far side dropped into a steep gorge. They were effectively trapped, unless Daenerys could ferry them away one by one. But Drogon, injured and raging, could barely land safely on the uneven ground. The undead horde pressed closer. The sky had turned leaden, and snow began to swirl in thick gusts, as if conjured by the White Walkers' presence. Robb felt a surge of panic. They had to escape or they would die here and join the army of the dead. Tormund cursed as another White lunged at him, and he hacked it apart. Grey Worm glanced at Robb, stoic yet desperate. The White they'd captured shrieked in the net, snapping at the air. If it escaped or was destroyed, their plan was doomed. Daenerys circled overhead again, raining fire. But just then, a White Walker hurled another spear of razor-sharp ice with uncanny precision. Drogon twisted in midair, the projectile grazing his shoulder. The dragon bellowed, veering dangerously, and Daenerys clung to his back for dear life. She managed to stay astride, guiding him in a half-crash, half-landing on the edge of the ridge. Jagged stone and snow exploded in a spray. Robb rushed to help, heart hammering. Drogon's wing was bleeding badly, black scales slick with freezing droplets of his own blood. The White Walkers advanced with unnerving calm, their undead cavalry surrounding the ridge. All seemed lost, until a horn blast echoed through the storm, deep and resonant. Robb spun around to see a distant force cresting the ridge behind them. At first, in the swirling snow, he couldn't tell who they were. Then he spotted glints of steel and recognized the silhouettes of living men. Leading them was Ser Barristan Selmy, a contingent of additional Unsullied, and a group of Northern Knights. Perhaps Daenerys, fearing the worst, had sent them after her when she flew north. They charged the undead from the rear, cutting through Whites in an effort to reach Robb's beleaguered party. The unexpected flanking maneuver threw the White Walkers off, forcing them to divide their attention. Seizing the chance, Robb roared for his companions to fight their way to Barristan's line. Daenerys swung herself off Drogon, who was too wounded to fly at the moment, and joined them on foot, brandishing a spear handed to her by a fallen Unsullied. Together, they hacked and slashed at the undead that tried to bar their path. The captured White remained in chains, dragged by two Unsullied. Barristan's forces carved a narrow corridor of safety. One White Walker, taller than the rest, charged at Daenerys, raising an icy blade. Robb threw himself between them, clashing steel on frost. The White Walker's blow nearly numbed his arm, but he gritted his teeth, pivoted, and sliced the creature's torso. The being shattered into glittering shards. Battling exhaustion, Robb and Daenerys staggered into the ranks of their rescuers. With the advantage of surprise gone, the White Walkers called back the Whites, retreating into the swirling snow. They were not reckless foes. They recognized that this new force threatened their immediate objective. Tormund spat after them, cursing. The undead melted away, disappearing into the vastness of the storm. Despite the respite, no one felt truly safe. The party hastily fell back to a more defensible position, still hauling the bound White. Drogon limped behind, snarling in pain, Daenerys whispering soft reassurances. Once they reached relative safety, Barristan confirmed that Daenerys had, indeed, dispatched him with a second wave of reinforcements when she decided to fly ahead. He bowed deeply to both Robb and the Queen. "I feared we'd arrived too late." "You arrived in the nick of time," Daenerys said, still catching her breath. "Thank you, Ser Barristan." Their victory was tenuous. The army of the dead remained at large. But they had what they came for, one white, captured and bound, a horrifying testament to the reality of the threat. They wasted no more time heading back toward the wall under continuous vigilance. Drogon, wounded, could still fly short distances. Daenerys helped the dragon limp along, taking to the air occasionally to scout. Over several days, they trudged through storms and half-frozen rivers. Morale was low, for the cold and the memory of the near disaster weighed heavily on them. Yet they pressed on, each step bringing them closer to Castle Black, to safer ground, and to the chance that the realm would believe their impossible tale. When at last the wall's icy ramparts came into sight through swirling snow, relief and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm the survivors. At Castle Black, they quickly made arrangements to send the captive White south. The monstrous thing never stopped snarling and thrashing, and some of the Night's Watch men looked at it with undisguised horror. Robb and Daenerys knew well that the Southern Lords would react much the same, though if that horror unified them, so much the better. The next challenge was how to transport the White safely without it breaking free or harming them mid-journey. After some debate, they decided to place it in a sturdy iron cage that had been used to hold supplies. The bars were reinforced with additional chains. The White, still netted, was forced inside, where it clawed at the iron. Daenerys arranged for a small caravan to carry the cage on a wagon, flanked by guards day and night. Drogon's injuries needed tending, so the Queen decided to travel with the main group south instead of risking flight with a wounded dragon. The other two dragons, Rhaegal and Viserion, remained at Winterfell, where they could be fed and cared for. Robb felt dread settle in his stomach. The plan was to travel to a parley in the heart of the Crownlands, near King's Landing, to present the White before Cersei and her court. Their demands: a truce, an alliance against the dead, or at least a promise not to attack from the south while the north and Daenerys' forces held the wall. It was a colossal gamble, yet with the undead threat verified, they had few alternatives. Barristan pointed out that they'd need to be extremely vigilant, for Cersei might accept the invitation just to attempt an ambush. Daenerys decided that only a select group would go to the parley. She would go in person, as would Robb. The rest of their armies would remain spread between Winterfell and the Riverlands, ready to defend if the Lannisters tried anything treacherous. The capture of the White had cost them dearly in lives. There was no appetite for more risk than necessary. Still, if Daenerys was to prove her sincerity, she needed to meet Cersei face to face. Robb insisted on accompanying her, conscious of the possibility that it could be a final confrontation. They left Winterfell after only a brief respite, the iron cage bearing the bound White clattering along behind a line of wagons. Beside them marched a detachment of Unsullied and Northern Knights, a living testament to the alliance. The journey south through the Neck was fraught. Frey men patrolled the roads around the Twins, but they did not attempt to bar the passage. Likely Walder Frey wanted no direct conflict with dragons. Stories of dragonfire had a way of making cowards cautious. Robb suppressed a surge of anger each time he saw the Frey banners. The memory of the Red Wedding ran too deep, but he could not afford to let vengeance derail the mission now. As they progressed into the Riverlands, more lords and knights joined or offered safe passage. Some had old loyalties to House Tully or House Stark. Others were simply alarmed by talk of the undead. Eventually, they passed the charred ruins of towns ravaged by years of war. Reminders of the War of the Five Kings lay everywhere. Burnt farmhouses, collapsed septs, fields turned to weed-choked battlefields. The people they encountered seemed weary, haunted, but some brightened at the sight of the dire wolf and dragon banners riding side by side. Whispers spread. The king in the north rides again, and the dragon queen is with him. Hope and uncertainty warred in the eyes of the common folk. They neared King's Landing under heavy tension. Scouts reported that Cersei was indeed preparing a site outside the capital for the parley, presumably because she did not wish to risk a dragon wreaking havoc within the city walls. The designated place was the ruined dragon pit atop Rhaenys' Hill, a symbolic location once used to house Targaryen dragons. Now it stood in crumbling disrepair, a testament to how far the Targaryen dynasty had fallen. The irony was not lost on Daenerys. When the day of the parley arrived, they proceeded to the dragon pit with utmost caution. Daenerys allowed only Drogon to accompany her, the other dragons left behind so as not to provoke the Lannisters into panic. Robb walked beside her, eyes scanning the crowds for any threat. Their chosen escorts were minimal: Ser Barristan, Grey Worm, and a handful of northern and Unsullied guards. The White's cage sat on a cart draped in tarpaulin to hide its hideous occupant from prying eyes until the appointed time. Cersei Lannister arrived with her retinue, flanked by the hulking figure of the undead Ser Gregor Clegane. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Jaime Lannister stood near his sister, face unreadable as he regarded Robb Stark, the man rumored dead, now very much alive and allied with a Targaryen queen. A ring of gold-cloaked guardsmen surrounded the place, watchful for any treachery. Euron Greyjoy stood off to one side, a sneer on his lips, while Qyburn, Cersei's sinister advisor, observed with curiosity. Daenerys made an entrance upon Drogon's back, the great beast alighting on the cracked floor of the dragon pit in a swirl of dust. She dismounted, her expression regal, while Drogon let out a low, rumbling growl that resonated against the ancient dome. Then the parley began. The emptiness of the pit seemed to magnify every word, every footstep. Cersei spoke first, feigning politeness. "I've come as agreed, despite what some might call madness, to meet with those who would steal my throne. Let me hear your grand claims." Daenerys inclined her head slightly, ignoring the jab. "We did not come to speak of thrones today, your grace, but of survival. A threat looms in the north that endangers us all. My men have brought proof." Robb signaled to the guards, who wheeled forward the cart bearing the cage. Grey Worm yanked away the covering. The White inside lunged at the bars, snapping and shrieking. Gasps arose from the Lannister entourage. Even Cersei's mask of composure slipped momentarily. Qyburn stepped closer, fascinated, his dark eyes glittering. Euron sneered, but the uneasy set of his jaw betrayed fear. With a nod from Robb, Grey Worm unlatched the cage door briefly, just enough for the White to hurl itself forward at the nearest target. The hateful thing charged straight at Cersei, who recoiled. Ser Gregor stepped in with his massive frame, ready to cleave the creature in half. But Grey Worm yanked it back with a heavy chain around its torso. The White gnashed mindlessly, ignoring the damage to its own body. The demonstration could not have been clearer. This was death incarnate, unstoppable by mere fear or pain. Silence stretched. Jaime Lannister looked stunned, his golden hand twitching. Even Cersei, after a moment, recovered her composure only to say in a tight voice, "What is this?" Daenerys' voice carried an edge of urgency. "The dead come for the living. There are thousands, tens of thousands, commanded by White Walkers. If we do not unite to fight them, we will all become like this creature, reanimated corpses in an army of death." Robb stepped forward, ignoring the sharp glares of the Lannister guards. He kept his tone measured, but inside, the memory of the Red Wedding churned. "I, Robb Stark, once king in the north, stand here to tell you that this is no lie. I've seen them with my own eyes. They will not care whose sigil we bear or what crowns we wear. They will kill us all." Cersei shot him a venomous glance. "You were reported dead, Stark. Your presence here is an insult to the memory of those who were slaughtered at the Twins. My father." "Your father orchestrated the Red Wedding," Robb cut her off, voice cold as the north. "You and I both know the truth of that. But none of it matters now if the realm falls to the dead. We cannot fight each other and the White Walkers." Cersei's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing to contradict him. Tension rippled across the gathering. For a moment, it seemed she might dismiss their plea as nonsense. Then the White let out another blood-curdling shriek, rattling its cage. Even Ser Gregor seemed taken aback by the creature's unholy tenacity. Jaime swallowed visibly, glancing at Cersei with a worried frown. Qyburn, apparently enthralled by the display, murmured something to Cersei. She lifted her chin, addressing Daenerys with forced calm. "This is indeed alarming. If what you say is true, I have no desire to see our armies destroyed. Suppose we agree to a temporary truce. You will cease all hostilities and remain in the north to fight this threat. In return, I will pledge that the Lannister forces do not advance upon you. Once this matter is resolved, we will discuss the question of the Iron Throne." It was a more measured response than Robb had feared, but the underlying tone bristled with traps. Daenerys had not come to relinquish her claim indefinitely. Yet if they refused, a war on two fronts would doom them all. She exchanged a glance with Robb. He saw the same conflict in her eyes, the need to save the realm versus the risk of trusting the woman who had tried to kill her. Ultimately, survival won out. "I accept your terms for a truce," Daenerys said carefully, "so long as you keep your word." Cersei nodded, a tight smile curling her lips. "I always keep my word when it suits me." She gestured for her retinue to withdraw, throwing a final glance at the caged White. "Dispose of that thing before it wreaks more havoc here." And with that, the parley ended. Cersei and her courtiers left the dragon pit, their footsteps echoing in the silent gloom. Daenerys and Robb shared a look that spoke volumes of mistrust. They had won, or so it seemed, a respite from Lannister aggression. But how long would it last? Euron Greyjoy's smirk, the set of Cersei's shoulders, the troubled look on Jaime's face. Everything hinted that hidden agendas were in play. Daenerys ordered the White to be burned outside the city walls. But that night, she met privately with Robb in their makeshift camp near the Blackwater. She removed her riding gloves, stepping close to a brazier where coals glowed red. "I don't trust her." Robb rubbed the back of his neck, tension coiling in his muscles. "Nor do I, but we have no choice. If she stays her hand, we have time to fortify the north. If she reneges, we'll face the Lannisters again, only with fewer resources." Daenerys paced, her breath tight with frustration. "And that's precisely what she wants. Perhaps she'll let the undead weaken us, then strike when we're at our most vulnerable." Robb nodded. "We'll prepare for that scenario. I'll send word to Winterfell immediately. Have them keep scouts posted and watch for Lannister or Frey movement. We'll continue to rally our allies. At least now we have some moral high ground. If Cersei breaks the truce, all of Westeros will see her treachery." Her gaze softened slightly, flicking over his face. "This is a fragile moment. Our alliance, our cause, everything hangs in the balance." He hesitated, then placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll see it through. We've come too far, survived too much to fail now." They lingered there, side by side in the cold night, letting the glow of the brazier warm them. Beneath the surface, an unspoken awareness flowed, a closeness that had grown amidst shared battles and burdens, yet neither gave voice to it. The realm was on the brink of an apocalypse, and personal feelings, however strong, took second place to the weight of crowns and survival. The following days saw a tense withdrawal from the Crownlands. They parted ways with Cersei's retinue. Each side eyed the other warily. The caged White had done its job as a demonstration. Now that abomination was destroyed in flames. Scouts reported that Jaime Lannister was pulling some forces back from the fields to regroup near the capital, while Euron Greyjoy had vanished with his fleet, likely to pursue some cunning plan of his own. Daenerys and Robb decided to return north quickly, for winter only grew harsher, and the real war was in the far north. Along the journey, they repeated the warnings to any lord still on the fence. "Join us or die when the dead come." To their relief, a trickle of reinforcements began to follow them. Some were knights from the Stormlands who had no love for Cersei and recognized the threat. A few lesser lords from the Westerlands quietly defected, unwilling to serve a queen they deemed too ruthless and cunning. They brought precious wagons of grain and salt meat, enough to strengthen the armies waiting at Winterfell. Every man, every sword was welcome. When the large host finally reached Winterfell, the courtyard swarmed with new arrivals. Daenerys' dragons soared overhead, their roars greeting her return. A hush fell across the gathered soldiers as they saw the scale of the forces mustering, unsullied in neat ranks, Dothraki encampments with horses stamping restlessly, northern bannermen drilling in the yard, and smaller contingents from various regions. The living had come together in a show of unity not seen in generations. Yet was it enough to stop the dead? The days that followed were a blur of organizing. Daenerys and Robb convened war councils with all the leading figures, northern lords, southern knights, Dothraki khals, and the unsullied captains. Maps were spread across great tables. Plans took shape for how to defend the wall, how to maneuver if the undead breached it, and how to coordinate communications. Every detail mattered, from the forging of dragonglass weapons mined from Dragonstone and shipped north to the training of royal recruits from the local villages. Robb walked the battlements at dawn or dusk, scanning the horizon. Each breath of icy air steeled him for what lay ahead. Lady Lyanna Mormont rallied her small but fierce contingent, while Tormund returned to the wall to watch for the first sign of the dead's approach. Daenerys often joined Robb on these walks, discussing supply lines or the distribution of forces. In those quiet moments, a bond deeper than alliance flickered between them, an understanding that fate had thrust them together, forging them in the crucible of war. Such fleeting peace ended when a raven arrived from Castle Black one freezing night, its message brief and dire. The Night King's army had reached the wall, a vast legion of whites stretching to the horizon. Tormund reported that the White Walkers brought with them an unnatural cold, blackening the sky with swirling blizzards. The alarm spread through Winterfell like wildfire. Daenerys ordered immediate preparation for departure, calling upon every able-bodied fighter to move to the wall. Her dragons would be their spearhead, aiming to rain fire upon the undead from above. Robb organized the ground forces, dividing them into columns that could march simultaneously. If the wall fell, they would have to fight the battle on their own soil. News worsened as they marched north. The Night King had a new weapon, a resurrected dragon. Word traveled from watchers who escaped Eastwatch by the sea, claiming that one of Daenerys' dragons, Viserion, had been felled beyond the wall and then raised by the Night King's foul magic. Daenerys reeled at the news, heartbreak mingling with fury. The thought of her own child of fire turned into an undead abomination horrified her. Robb offered what comfort he could, but her grief was profound. She pressed on with Drogon and Rhaegal, determined to face the Night King's monstrous mount if necessary. At last, the combined armies arrayed themselves along the approaches to the wall. The Night's Watch, battered and severely outnumbered, welcomed the reinforcements. Snow whirled in ferocious gusts, stinging eyes and numbing fingers. Fires dotted the landscape as the living prepared trenches and barricades, all lined with dragonglass-tipped spikes. The dragons circled overhead, watchful. Men huddled in the shadows of the massive ice edifice, dwarfed by its height, feeling dwarfed even more by the knowledge of what advanced from the north. Darkness fell early that day, the sky choked with storm clouds. Torches formed lines of orange in the gloom. At the stroke of midnight, a distant rumbling heralded the arrival of the dead. First came whites in a staggering mass, their eyes glowing. They swarmed the open field before the wall, colliding with the first lines of the living. Battle erupted in a cacophony of shouts, screams, and the clang of steel. Robb fought in the thick of it, snow swirling around him as he hacked at rotting corpses that refused to fall until they were burned or struck with dragonglass. The ground became slick with melting ice and blackened gore. From above, Drogon spat flame in long arcs, incinerating columns of whites. Rhaegal joined, scorching entire ranks of the undead. For a moment, it seemed the dragons might keep the tide at bay. But then an unholy shriek resonated across the battlefield. Out of the swirling storm soared Viserion, undead and bearing the Night King upon his back. The creature's once warm eyes were now a ghastly blue, and the flames it unleashed were no ordinary fire. They were tinted a sickly, icy hue, demolishing anything in their path. One blast struck a portion of the wall near Eastwatch, shattering it in a roar of collapsing ice. Men screamed as massive chunks of ice rained down, burying them alive. Daenerys, astride Drogon, rose to meet the Night King in the sky. Rhaegal flanked them, roaring defiantly. Robb, entrenched in the chaos below, glimpsed the aerial battle as bursts of fiery light above the swirling storm clouds. He rallied men around him, pushing back whites that threatened to overrun their lines. The clang of steel and the screams of the dying saturated the night. The stench of death was overpowering, but still they fought, refusing to yield. Daenerys and the Night King clashed in midair. Viserion's icy flame nearly engulfed Drogon, but Daenerys guided him in a daring spiral. Drogon retaliated with searing dragon fire. The undead Viserion shrieked, parts of his decaying flesh igniting. Yet the Night King hurled a spear of ice, striking Rhaegal in the flank. The living dragon roared in agony, plummeting toward the battlefield, landing with a bone-jarring crash that sent snow flying. Men scattered. Rhaegal writhed, struggling to take off again, but the wound leaked steaming blood. Whites converged on the downed dragon, swarming like ants on a fallen bird. Seeing this, Robb abandoned the line, sprinting with a squad of northern warriors to defend the injured dragon. They hacked at the whites, clawing up Rhaegal's scales. The great beast lashed its tail, flattening rows of the undead, but still more came. Flames flickered where the dragon spat fire in desperation. At last, with the help of a wedge of unsullied spearmen, Robb managed to carve out a ring of safety around Rhaegal. He placed a hand on the dragon's flank, feeling the creature's labored breathing. "Hold on," he muttered, though he knew the dragon could not understand his words. The beast's eyes rolled with pain, yet a savage intelligence glinted there. Above, Daenerys continued her duel with the Night King, but as the undead Viserion battered Drogon with icy flames, a swirling snowstorm closed around them. The Queen and the Night King vanished into the roaring darkness, the sky alight with fleeting bursts of flame. On the ground, the living lines buckled under the ceaseless waves of whites. The White Walkers advanced, shrouded in cold, their gaunt forms leading the hordes. Screams rose at every turn. Men burned pyres of corpses only to see more corpses surge forward. In the midst of that pandemonium, Robb glimpsed a shape emerging through the white ranks, tall, crowned with ice. The Night King strode forward, alone, no longer atop Viserion. Blue eyes locked on the living with eerie calm. As if responding to a silent command, whites drew back, forming a corridor of death. Robb felt his blood run cold. Where was Daenerys? Where was Drogon? Grey Worm appeared by Robb's side, battered but unbowed. We cannot hold them back much longer, the commander said, voice taut. Robb swallowed. We stand our ground, we have to. He lifted his sword, pointing at the Night King's figure. If we kill him, maybe the rest will fall. It was a desperate hope gleaned from rumors that the White Walkers were linked to the army of the dead. If their leader died, perhaps the enchantment would break. Robb sprinted forward, ignoring Grey Worm's shout to wait. The Whites surged around the Night King, but the White Walkers parted them with gestures as though saving Robb for their master. The wind cut like a razor. Robb's breath came in ragged gasps. He raised his Valyrian steel blade, heart hammering as he closed the distance. The Night King raised one long, pale hand. A sort of jagged ice formed out of the air, glinting in the flickering flames of the battlefield. The two met in a clash that echoed over the moans of the dying. Steel and ice screeched against each other, sending sparks of blue and silver dancing. Robb felt the shock reverberate through his arms, his bones chilled to the marrow. The Night King's expression never changed, cold, impassive, ancient. Attack after attack battered Robb's defenses. Only the properties of Valyrian steel allowed his sword to withstand the ice blade. Still, each parry numbed his fingers further, each step threatened to be his last. With a roar of effort, Robb lunged, the Valyrian steel biting into the Night King's side. For a heartbeat, hope flared. But the creature only staggered slightly, then swatted Robb aside with inhuman strength. Pain exploded in Robb's shoulder as he hit the ground. The Night King raised his blade for a killing blow, and then a burst of dragon fire engulfed them. Drogon slammed down into the snow, Daenerys astride him. She unleashed a torrent of flame that washed over the Night King. Flames roared, melting snow and sending steam billowing. Robb shielded his eyes from the heat, rolling away to avoid being scorched. When the fire subsided, the Night King still stood, frost swirling around him, though the ice upon his armor was cracked. He lifted his eyes to Daenerys, who glared down with wrath etched into every line of her face. Robb scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain. Together, he and Daenerys attacked once more, him on the ground, her from Drogon's back. The Night King responded with a howling wind that battered Drogon's wings. The dragon roared, buffeted but unbroken. Robb seized the chance to strike from behind, plunging his sword toward the creature's back. The Night King spun, blocking with preternatural speed. Ice and steel clashed in a deafening ring. For a moment, they locked in a deadly stalemate, pushing against each other, eyes locked. Robb's arms trembled. The Night King's strength was staggering. Suddenly, a flash of movement, Daenerys leapt off Drogon's saddle with a spear of dragonglass in hand. She drove it at the Night King's exposed flank. He twisted away, but not fast enough. The dragonglass bit deep into his torso and a shrill hiss erupted from his lips. Blue cracks spiderwebbed across his form from the wound outward. Robb, seeing the chance, drove his Valyrian steel blade forward, piercing the Night King's chest. A scream like breaking ice tore through the battlefield. The Night King shuddered, the glow in his eyes flickering. Then, in an explosion of swirling frost, he fractured into shards that dissolved into the wind. All around, Whites stopped in mid-lunge or collapsed to the ground, eyes dark. The White Walkers shrieked and dissolved, their forms scattering like ash on the snow. The undead dragon Viserion crashed out of the sky, lifeless once again. An eerie silence fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of the living. Robb slumped to his knees, adrenaline draining away. Daenerys stood beside him, shaking from exertion and the icy wind. She gripped his arm, their eyes meeting in stunned relief. Across the battlefield, men stared in disbelief as the Whites that had threatened to devour them simply dropped, inert once more. Cheers and sobs mingled in a rising crescendo as the living realized they had won. Snow continued to fall softly over the carnage. Bodies of men and beasts lay scattered, but no new undead rose. The war for the dawn, at least this battle, was over. Daenerys knelt, her hair matted with sweat and ice, and clasped Robb's hand. He could see the tears in her eyes, tears of sorrow for the fallen, tears of joy for victory. Fire met ice in that moment, forging a bond that transcended alliances. The living had prevailed, but at a terrible cost. The next days were spent counting the dead, burning pyres so the Whites could never be risen again. Rhaegal was gravely wounded but alive, nursed back to health by those who tended dragons. Drogon bore new scars. Thousands of northern men, unsullied, Dothraki, and allies from other parts of the realm had perished. But the Night King was no more, and winter's greatest horror had been averted. Returning to Winterfell, Daenerys and Robb found a mixture of mourning and celebration. The realm owed them a debt, one that no doubt would be repaid in political ways. Yet Cersei's threat still hung over them. With the undead vanquished, the Lannister queen might decide to break her so-called truce and strike. But for now, the North rejoiced in life. Bonfires burned bright against the swirling snow, and though the nights were still long and cold, hearts were warmer with hope. In the great hall of Winterfell, Daenerys gathered the survivors to honor their bravery. Robb, battered and bandaged, stood at her side. She hailed the North for its unwavering courage. She hailed the Unsullied for their unbreakable discipline, the Dothraki for their fearless spirit, and every man or woman who had faced the impossible. Then, with solemnity, she acknowledged the price they had paid. We have lost so many, but we have saved countless more. Let us remember those who fell as heroes. Applause resounded, tempered by grief. Robb added his own words, voice rough with emotion. When I marched south years ago, I sought vengeance. This time, we fought for survival. And we could not have done it without all of you, nor without our queen. He turned to Daenerys, offering a slight bow. She has proven she is not just the breaker of chains, but the defender of the realm. A roar of approval rose. Daenerys' cheeks flushed, and she inclined her head in gratitude. In that moment, she appeared every inch the queen Westeros needed, strong, compassionate, and victorious. The hall erupted in cheers for both of them, for the unlikely alliance that had delivered the living from the darkness. That night, when the revels died down, Robb found Daenerys once more in the godwood, where the red leaves rustled in the biting wind. She stood beneath the weirwood, gazing at the carved face, her breath misting the air. Soft torchlight illuminated her silver hair. Robb approached quietly, a heavy fur cloak draped over his shoulders. They were both exhausted, but the hush of the godwood offered a rare moment of calm. He stepped beside her, letting the silence linger a moment. Finally, he spoke. We did it. We saved the living. She nodded, exhaling a shaky breath. I never imagined the cost would be so high, or that I would fight a dead dragon, my own child turned against me. She swallowed. But we prevailed. Because of all of us, because of you. He bowed his head, remembering the swirl of chaos and that final, desperate strike. You were the one who drove the dragonglass into him. I only followed through. We did it together. She turned, meeting his eyes, and he saw gratitude and warmth there. Thank you, she whispered. For believing in me when so many wouldn't. For bringing me into your home and trusting me with the North. I know not all of your lords were eager for my presence. He reached out, gently touching her hand. They will come to see your worth. As I have. You saved them. You saved us all. There's still the matter of Cersei, but after what we've accomplished, I believe we can face anything. Daenerys offered a tentative smile. Will you stand by me? When we face the south. Robb squeezed her hand, and for a moment, the realm's burdens faded from his mind. He saw only the woman who had fought side by side with him, who had sacrificed and suffered for a land not her own. He nodded. Always. They stood like that for a long time, the wind whispering through the red leaves overhead, the ancient face on the weirwood silently bearing witness. The ephemeral barrier between fire and ice, between two royals thrust into roles they never sought, melted away in that stillness. In the quiet hush of the godwood, there was no iron throne, no crown, no burden of prophecy, only two figures who had endured heartbreak and found renewed purpose in each other's resolve. The next days brought the realm's new dawn. All across the north and beyond, the battered survivors of the war with the dead regrouped. Messages spread of the Night King's defeat, spurring both relief and new anxieties. The Lannisters remained, still occupying King's Landing, still holding southern territories in their grip. For the first time in years, though, the living faced the future without the specter of a supernatural apocalypse on their shoulders. The realm, once more, was about to be shaped by mortal hands. Daenerys summoned her advisors, including Robb, to discuss the next steps. Would they negotiate with Cersei once more, or march on King's Landing to finally break Lannister power? The question loomed large, for the armies were exhausted from the war in the north. Yet the dragons remained formidable, and new allies, inspired by their defeat of the dead, might rally to their banner. The North would stand by Daenerys, seeing her as the savior who kept them from an icy doom. And in Robb Stark, they saw a leader reborn, tempered by trials beyond imagining. Even in the midst of strategic debates, rumors whispered of something deeper between the Dragon Queen and the Wolf King. Courtiers gossiped about the stolen glances. The mutual respect turned into something closer. Yet no official pronouncement was made. Both were keenly aware that alliances in Westeros could be as fragile as glass. Politics demanded caution, and so did the wounds each carried. But the quiet moments they shared in Winterfell's corridors, in the Godswood's hush, spoke of a bond unbreakable by convenience or ambition. Slowly, as winter's grip loosened just enough to allow for strategic planning, Daenerys and Robb prepared for what might be the last great test. The Iron Throne remained contested, and the Lannisters would not surrender their power lightly. The realm, weary of war, yearned for stability, but would it be found in fire and blood, or in carefully brokered treaties? As always, the path ahead was uncertain, yet they faced it armed with a unity forged in the fires of adversity. In the courtyard one afternoon, Robb practiced swordplay with a few loyal northern knights. The clang of metal rang in the frosty air. Daenerys watched from a stone balcony, hands resting on the balustrade. She saw the fluidity of his movements, the calm confidence, and the subdued pain that still lingered in his eyes. When he saw her, he paused, nodding in acknowledgement. She smiled softly, remembering the man who had once arrived in Essos as a broken exile, determined to regain his kingdom through any means. Now he was a champion of the living, his name spoken with reverence even in places far south. She descended to the courtyard, drawing him aside. "I've been speaking with Ser Barristan," she said, voice low. "He believes that if we push south now, while the Lannisters are uncertain, we might break their hold quickly. But it's a gamble. Our forces are spread thin. We lost many in the battle against the dead." Robb set aside his sword, wiping sweat from his brow. "I understand his reasoning. If we give Cersei time, she'll raise new armies or cut deals with opportunistic lords. She might also lure Euron Greyjoy back to trap us at sea." Daenerys glanced around, ensuring no one overheard. "What would you do if it were your choice?" He thought for a moment, remembering the bitter lessons from his previous war against the Lannisters. "I would gather the realm first, reach out to the Vale, to Dorne if possible, to any who resent the Lannisters' tyranny. Show them that we are the future, and if they don't join, they risk facing a united force anyway. Minimize bloodshed if we can. The people have bled enough." She nodded, relief shining in her eyes. "I agree. It's not weakness to want fewer dead. We can send envoys to the Vale and Dorne. If they join us, we'll have overwhelming numbers. The Lannisters will have no choice but to surrender or fight a hopeless cause." Robb curled his lip, thinking of Cersei's cunning. "She won't go quietly. She'll hold King's Landing until the last. But at least we can reduce the scale of war." He placed a hand lightly on Daenerys' arm. "You're doing the right thing. My father always said that a ruler's duty is to protect, not to conquer for the sake of glory. I think he'd have admired you." Her gaze flickered with both pride and sorrow. "I never knew your father, but from all you've told me, I wish I had." Their eyes met, and the hush between them said much that words could not. They were partners in every sense now, co-rulers of a realm they meant to save from tyranny. Not only from the White Walkers, but from those who treated the Iron Throne as a seat of personal power rather than responsibility. They lingered in that quiet understanding until a page hurried over with a message reminding them that duty called. Another war council, another decision to be made. Thus began the final phase of their campaign. Letters soared on raven wings to the distant corners of Westeros. Envoys were dispatched to the Vale, to Dorne, to any house not yet pinned under Cersei's heel. The story of the victory over the Night King spread with each messenger, forging respect and admiration for the Targaryen queen and the Stark king. Lords who once balked at foreign rule softened when they realized she had saved them from annihilation. Others, still loyal to the Lannisters, steeled themselves for a confrontation. But the tides of power were shifting fast. House Arryn, guided by the young Lord Robin Arryn and manipulated by Littlefinger for years, finally saw the writing on the wall. The Knights of the Vale chose to join Daenerys and Robb, spurred by the knowledge that the greatest threat was gone and that the future lay with the victors of the Long Night. Dorne, though fractured, agreed to send troops if Daenerys promised a seat at her council and a vow of retribution against the Lannisters for Ellaria Sand's downfall. A wave of lesser houses along the Crownlands also began to defect, unwilling to remain under the thumb of a queen who had dismissed the mortal threat of the dead so blithely. Cersei, cornered, tried to make deals with the Iron Bank of Bravos to hire the Golden Company. Euron Greyjoy reappeared, swaggering, claiming he would defend King's Landing with his fleet. But the unstoppable reality of a united Westeros, North, South, and even some of the River Lords proved daunting. When Daenerys and Robb finally marched south with a massive host, the land itself seemed to part before them. Lord after lord surrendered rather than face Dragonfire and Northern Steel. At the Rose Road, Jaime Lannister led a last stand of royal loyalists. Though he fought valiantly, it was no match for the combined might arrayed against him. Daenerys gave orders to spare as many soldiers as would surrender, refusing to become the tyrant many feared. Jaime, captured, was brought before her and Robb. Looking weary and older, he bowed stiffly, golden hand reflecting the sun. "I was sworn to protect the realm," he said. "Seems it's you two who are doing that now." Daenerys studied him. "What of your sister?" Jaime closed his eyes. "She'll never bow. She'd rather burn the city and everyone in it before surrendering." At those words, Daenerys exchanged a glance with Robb. Burning King's Landing was the very outcome they hoped to avoid. They had come as liberators, not destroyers. Yet they could not allow Cersei to hold the capital as a final bastion of defiance. The approach to King's Landing was fraught with the possibility of madness. Would Cersei unleash wildfire, as rumors said she had done before? Robb remembered the stories of the Mad King, how Jaime had earned the moniker Kingslayer by preventing the destruction of the city. Now, ironically, it might be Cersei who threatened mass immolation. Carefully, Daenerys orchestrated the siege of King's Landing. Dragons circled overhead, an unmistakable deterrent. Her ground forces surrounded the city, cutting off supply lines. She offered terms: open the gates, yield, and be spared. The small folk, terrified of dragons and the memory of war, clamored for peace. Yet Cersei ignored their pleas, determined to keep the throne. Days passed, tension mounting. Daenerys refused to torch the city, unwilling to slaughter innocents. She and Robb walked the siege lines, conferring with generals, seeking any path that would end the standoff without unnecessary bloodshed. Finally, a faction of King's Landing residents, desperate and hungry, opened a gate in the city's north wall. The Allied forces poured in, quickly overwhelming the Loyalist guards. Chaos rippled through the streets as pockets of Lannister men fought valiantly, but the tide of the war was obvious. In the Red Keep, Cersei clung to the Iron Throne. Euron's fleet in the Blackwater Bay was battered by storms and dragonfire, leaving her no escape. She stood alone in the throne room, the mountain by her side, a defiant sneer on her lips. Daenerys and Robb entered together, flanked by Ser Barristan and Grey Worm. Torches cast dancing shadows on the cold steel blades of the throne. Cersei rose, eyes gleaming with madness. "So," she said, voice trembling with rage, "you come to claim this throne? After you wasted your strength on an undead threat that might have scoured our enemies for us." Daenerys' expression was unreadable, though her voice was calm. "We saved this realm. Now we bring peace." Cersei bared her teeth. "Peace? I see conquerors. I see dragons that you use to terrorize my men. You'll never have the loyalty of these people. They belong to me." Robb bristled, thinking of all the innocents who had suffered under Cersei's rule. "No, they belong to themselves. You would have let them die just to hold onto your power." She spat at him, eyes full of contempt. Ser Gregor loomed forward, but Grey Worm stepped in, spear ready. Tension crackled. Daenerys' tone turned icy. "It's over, Cersei. Surrender or face justice for your crimes." The queen let out a mirthless laugh, brushing past the mountain's protective stance. "Justice? My father burned your grandfather and uncle, Targaryen. You want to continue this cycle of vengeance? Go ahead. Kill me. Prove you're no better than the so-called Mad King." Daenerys' gaze flickered. She recalled the vow she once made never to be like the tyrants who came before her. She raised her voice so that all could hear. "Cersei Lannister, you are hereby deposed for crimes against the crown and the realm. Lay down your arms and you will have a fair trial. Resist and we will show no mercy." Cersei's composure cracked. She shrieked, "I am the queen." Then, in a final act of desperation, she lunged for a hidden dagger among the folds of her gown. The blade flashed as she rushed at Daenerys. Robb moved on instinct, stepping in to block, but the mountain surged forward, aiming a monstrous blow at him. Grey Worm's spear met the mountain's sword in a jarring clash. For a heartbeat, chaos reigned. In that moment, Ser Barristan, swift despite his age, knocked the dagger from Cersei's hand, seizing her wrist. The blade clattered across the marble floor. Daenerys stepped back, heart-pounding. Robb reeled from the mountain's near-fatal strike but managed to hold his ground, parrying the brute's blade. Grey Worm aimed a precise thrust under the mountain's raised arm, piercing the weaker part of his armor. A horrifying bellow echoed as the giant knight faltered. Ser Barristan pressed his attack, driving the point of his sword through the visor in the mountain's helm. With a final rattling growl, the monstrous knight collapsed. Cersei shrieked, helpless as Barristan pinned her arms. She was dragged before Daenerys, eyes wild with hatred and fear. Outside, the clang of steel died away, replaced by the roars of a victorious army. The city had surrendered. Her reign was over. Dawn broke over King's Landing the following day, bathing the Red Keep in a pale gold light. In the throne room, Daenerys Targaryen ascended the Iron Throne, though she did not sit. Robb Stark stood at her right hand, the direwolf sigil on his cloak. Gathered lords and ladies, once terrified, now watched with a mix of awe and relief. The small folk peered in from the colonnades, whispering that the Dragon Queen had at last claimed her father's seat, but she did not revel in it. She simply stood, solemn, and declared a new chapter for Westeros. "In the wars that have gripped our land, we have lost so many," she began. "And in my quest, I have sought to break the wheel of tyranny. Today, let us end one era and begin another. I pledge to rule with fairness, to protect the weak, to unite the realm so that no darkness, no tyrant, no undead threat can ever threaten us again." Robb spoke next, raising his voice so all could hear. "House Stark stands with House Targaryen. We fought side by side to save the living. Now we stand side by side to rebuild the realm." Cheers rose, a tumult of hope from weary people. Some had never expected to see a Targaryen reclaim the throne. Others had never expected the Starks to rise again. But here they were, the wolf and the dragon, forging a promise of a better future. Soldiers from the Vale, Dorne, the Riverlands, and the North looked on proudly. The Dothraki banged their araks against the floor, chanting in their guttural tongue for their Khaleesi. The Unsullied stood at attention, silent yet resolute. In the days that followed, Cersei was imprisoned. A formal trial for her crimes was arranged, though rumors flew that she might choose poison rather than face justice. Jaime, taken prisoner, offered cooperation for leniency. Tyrion Lannister, who had been exiled and absent from court, returned discreetly, hopeful for a chance to serve a new monarchy that promised more wisdom than his sister ever had. Daenerys considered awarding him a place on her council, given his acumen. The process of reorganizing the realm's governance began. Daenerys declared that the North would retain a special status, acknowledging the hardships its people endured and the leadership of House Stark. Robb accepted a title akin to King Consort or Warden Supreme of the North, forging a system that allowed northern traditions to remain intact while affirming loyalty to the Iron Throne. The realm, battered by war, began the slow work of healing. Fields needed replanting, roads repairing, hunger alleviating. But at least now there was peace under a queen who had proven her willingness to bleed for Westeros and a Stark who had returned from the brink of death to champion his people. One evening, after a day of tireless meetings with lords seeking pardons and alliances, Daenerys escaped to the Red Keep's gardens. Robb found her by a fountain gazing at the moonlight on the water's surface. He approached softly, recalling how they once stood beneath the weirwood in Winterfell. The air here was warmer, scented by exotic blooms, yet he felt a similar hush, a sense that the burdens they carried might finally be lightened. She turned, a gentle smile forming. "It's done. The throne is ours, but the real work begins now." He exhaled, stepping closer, feeling the ache of old wounds and the relief of victory. We've won the war. Now we must win the peace." She let her gaze drift to the night sky, where stars sparkled above King's Landing's silhouette. "I don't want to be another conqueror. I want to break the cycle, ensure that no one suffers as you have." Robb reached out, taking her hand. "I'll stand with you in that. We'll show them a new way." In the hush of that moonlit garden, they felt the measure of what they had accomplished. The realm was saved from the dead, spared from Cersei's tyranny. A Targaryen once more occupied the Iron Throne, supported by the North and many other houses. And after all the trials, the betrayals, the heartbreak, they had each found someone who understood the weight of leadership and the cost of duty. Their bond was not forged by convenience, but by shared sacrifice, and in that bond lay a hopeful promise that this time, Westeros might truly know peace. Softly, in the midst of the fountain's gentle murmur, Daenerys closed the distance between them. The tension that had lingered for so long, the unspoken feelings overshadowed by war, finally found an outlet. Robb's breath caught as she tilted her head upward. Their lips met in a tender kiss, the warmth of it surprising in the cool night air. It carried the echo of all they had endured, all they had lost, and all they still dreamed of building together. When they parted, Daenerys rested her forehead against his, a faint smile curving her lips. "For the living," she whispered. Robb's heart pounded. He slid his arms around her, feeling the softness of her hair, the steadiness of her breathing. "For the living," he echoed, closing his eyes to savor the moment. In that quiet garden, beneath a sky luminous with stars, they allowed themselves the smallest taste of the future they hoped to forge in. A future unbound from the nightmares of the past, shaped instead by the promise that fire and ice, wolf and dragon could unite a realm torn asunder. And as the night deepened around them, somewhere in the distance, a dire wolf howled and a dragon roared, echoing in harmony for the new dawn that lay ahead. Robb woke the next morning to pale beams of sunlight spilling across the chamber's stone floor. The faint warmth felt incongruous after so many weeks spent on battlefields or patrolling the frozen north. Outside, King's Landing stirred with the sounds of reconstruction and tense new beginnings. He lay in bed for a moment, recalling the soft press of Daenerys' lips under the garden's moonlight the night before. Even in that hushed, timeless moment, he'd been conscious of how precarious their futures still were. They had won an unimaginable victory against the dead. They had toppled Cersei. Yet the memory of wars and the potential for fresh conflicts hovered over the Red Keep like a brooding storm cloud. Rising, he washed quickly, dressed, and headed out. The corridors felt foreign. He'd come here once as a boy, trailing after his father to witness King Robert's court, though at that time he hadn't lingered. The Red Keep was grander than he remembered. Now it was under Targaryen rule once again, the halls patrolled by Unsullied in neat ranks, with certain sections guarded by men bearing Stark sigils. Banners of the three-headed dragon and the dire wolf occasionally appeared side by side, an alliance that still made Robb's stomach twist with a mixture of pride and disbelief. He found Grey Worm in a side courtyard, deep in discussion with several officers. They appeared to be allocating men for watch duties across the city. The Unsullied commander gave Robb a brisk nod in greeting. Grey Worm had grown more at ease with certain Westerosi customs, but he was still laconic, his posture rigid with discipline. "How about the patrols?" Robb asked. Grey Worm inclined his head. "The city is quiet," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But many fear new chaos. Too many wars. Too many kings and queens. They wait to see if the Dragon Queen will bring peace. We hold the gates. We keep order." Robb folded his arms, gazing past the courtyard's walls at the rooftops beyond. The faint toll of a distant bell drifted on the breeze. "The people have every reason to fear. Cersei's been deposed, but we can't erase years of violence overnight. How are your men faring?" A flicker of something passed across Grey Worm's face, grief, perhaps, for the many Unsullied who had fallen in the battle against the dead. "They mourn our brothers who died," he said quietly. "But they trust the Queen. We fight on." Robb placed a hand on the man's shoulder, a rare gesture he hoped conveyed respect. "We'll do all we can to ensure that fight won't be necessary much longer. You have my thanks." Grey Worm said nothing further, but he gave a small, curt nod before returning to his conversation with the officers. Robb stepped away, heading for a wide balustrade that overlooked the city. The vista spilled out before him. Spires of ancient buildings, red-tiled roofs, the broad waters of the Blackwater shimmering in the early light. Construction and cleanup were underway in the streets. Broken carts, collapsed shopfronts, rubble from the final days of siege. People toiled to clear the debris. He recalled the battered remains of Winterfell after he had reclaimed it from the Boltons. The tasks of rebuilding, feeding the populace, and restoring trust had taken every ounce of will he possessed. Daenerys faced a similar challenge here, only magnified tenfold. King's Landing was the largest city in Westeros, home to countless souls who had endured famine, war, and oppression under multiple monarchs. They deserved better. Yet would they accept Daenerys after all the propaganda Cersei had fed them? His gaze drifted to the distant harbor. Once, the Lannisters had boasted of the royal fleet. Now, many ships were wrecked or commandeered, and Euron Greyjoy's monstrous iron fleet had scattered to the winds. Rumor claimed that Euron himself had fled when he saw the tide turn, leaving the city to stand or fall without him. Robb had no illusions that the Reaver was gone for good. There would be skirmishes, piratical raids, or last-ditch alliances. But for now, King's Landing was quiet. He turned at the soft sound of footsteps. Daenerys approached, clad in a flowing silver-blue gown trimmed with black, a half-cape draping from one shoulder. A circlet of dragon motifs rested lightly on her brow. The sight of her stirred a warm rush in Robb's chest. She carried herself with a calm poise that still bore the weight of sleepless nights and heavy decisions. A gentle smile touched her lips as she reached him. "Good morning," she said softly, glancing beyond the balustrade. "Have you seen the lines of refugees entering from the west? They came seeking food and safety." "I saw them from a distance," Robb replied. "We'll need to coordinate with the city leaders. We can't let them starve. Winter's not over, even if the dead are gone." She sighed, leaning her palms against the stone ledge. The breeze tugged a few strands of her silvery hair. Yes, that's why I called for a gathering in the throne room later today. We'll meet with the city's trade guilds and the leading merchants, as well as any lords who remain in the capital. We have to rebuild the distribution of food. Grain from the reach, fish from the coasts, anything that can be spared. Robb glanced at her, admiring how quickly she transitioned from queen in war to queen in reconstruction. I'll be at your side. Have you heard any word about the Lannister forces that surrendered at the Rose Road? She nodded. They're being held temporarily outside the city walls, their weapons confiscated. We'll release them once we're sure they mean no harm. My scouts say many are just farmers' sons conscripted by Cersei. They have no real loyalty to her, just desperation. He pressed his lips together, recalling how many young men had died in forced service to the Lannisters over the years. Then we should give them a way to return home without shame or fear. It might be the best step to ensure no renewed uprisings. Daenerys' gaze flickered with gratitude. I was hoping you'd say that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm too lenient, but I don't want to become the tyrant so many feared. I'd rather risk mercy than perpetuate endless bloodshed. Robb reached for her hand, giving it a brief, reassuring squeeze. You're doing what you set out to do. Break the wheel? Keep at it. She returned the pressure, then drew away. Come. We have an hour before the meeting. Perhaps we can walk among the people, see for ourselves how they fare. Robb's eyebrows rose. Walk? In the streets? A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. With a modest guard, of course, but I don't want to stay locked behind stone walls, hearing only what courtiers say. I need to see them, and they need to see me and see you. He recalled how his father, Eddard Stark, had once strolled through Winterfell, speaking with small folk about harvests and minor disputes, ensuring he was not just a distant figure of power. Robb nodded. That's exactly what my father would have done. Let's do it. They descended into the courtyard, gathering a small escort of Unsullied and 2 northern guardsmen, both of whom wore the Stark direwolf surcoat. The main gates of the Red Keep opened onto a wide street that led downhill toward the city's bustling heart. The guards cleared a path, but Daenerys insisted on minimal pomp. No horns, no grand announcements. Just the Queen and the King of the North, albeit a king who had renounced the singular claim to rule but retained the love of his people, walking side by side among commoners. At first, the small folk shrank back, eyes wide, as Unsullied with their tall spears flanked Daenerys and Robb. Whispers rippled. The Dragon Queen, the Northern King, are they here to punish us? But Daenerys soon put them at ease with a gentle smile, a quiet greeting, asking questions about their troubles. Robb joined in, inquiring after families, water supplies, the state of local markets. Some recognized him from stories. He had once marched south as the young wolf, but now he wore no crown, simply a fur-edged cloak pinned with the Stark sigil. Children peered out from behind ragged cloaks. One boy ventured close, wide-eyed as he stared at Daenerys' hair. Are you the one with dragons? He asked in a timid voice. She knelt to his level, ignoring the startled intake of breath from her guards. I am, she said. But they're far too big to walk these streets now. They remain outside the city, away from the crowds. A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, then awe. I heard they breathed fire on the zombies. They did, she answered gently. They helped us keep the dead away. He blinked. Thank you. His voice quavered, and before she could speak again, he darted off, vanishing into the narrow alley where other children waited. Robb helped her rise, and they exchanged a glance that bristled with the unspoken reality. In time, she would be less of a fearful legend and more of a beloved sovereign if they navigated these uncertain days well. Together, they continued through the streets. They saw stalls selling watered-down ale and black bread, lines of people waiting to purchase the day's meager rations. Daenerys asked a merchant about the shortage of flour. He explained that Cersei had seized storehouses for her army, leaving the small folk with scraps. Daenerys promised that new shipments would arrive from the Reach once the supply lines were properly restored. Robb took notes in a small ledger, determined to remember the merchant's name and petition. He would see that the man's concerns were addressed. They passed tumble-down buildings that had burned during the final skirmishes, families sifting through debris for salvageable items. The sight tore at Robb's heart. He recognized something of the North's resilience in these people. They'd endured so much yet clung to life, forging onward. He vowed silently to do better by them than any Southern king had done for the North. They were all in the same realm after all. Tom slipped away faster than expected. Their escort politely reminded them that the throne room meeting would begin soon. Daenerys lingered another few minutes, thanking the people for their patience, urging them to speak to local officials about immediate needs. Then, with a final wave to the cluster of small folk, she and Robb turned back toward the Red Keep. The Great Hall felt different that morning, suffused with a restless anticipation. Several city officials, a master of trade, the head of the Bakers' Guild, the representative of the fisherfolk, awaited them, along with a handful of lords from the Crownlands and the Stormlands. Above the dais loomed the Iron Throne, stark and unadorned. Daenerys did not sit, preferring to stand at the foot of the steps and address them at eye level. Robb took up position beside her. The Master of Trade, a wiry man with an anxious face, spoke first. He outlined the city's dire food situation, pressing for immediate shipments. Next came the leader of the Bakers' Guild, who explained how rising costs of grain threatened to bankrupt many tradesmen. The fishermen's representative recounted that the fishing industry had suffered from Euron Greyjoy's raids. Now they needed ships repaired to bring in steady catches. The lords of the Stormlands stood to offer possible solutions. The Stormlands had farmland enough to spare if they could ensure safe transport. Daenerys listened intently, occasionally turning to Robb for his input. He suggested mobilizing a portion of the northern supply lines that might handle salted fish and other stores. An alliance with White Harbor could open trade routes along the coast so long as they could secure safe passage from pirates. The city officials exchanged hopeful glances. Daenerys promised to sign new decrees supporting these measures. "One more matter, Your Grace," said an older noble in the back, stepping forward. He was Lord Oakhart, if Robb recalled correctly, from a lesser house formerly sworn to the Tyrells. "We have men who served Cersei under duress. They wish to lay down arms, but they fear reprisals. Many have families to feed." Daenerys' expression remained composed. "No reprisals will be sanctioned for men who were conscripted and who now surrender. Let them return to their homes so long as they swear no further loyalty to Cersei. The war is over." A ripple of relief passed through the gathered. Robb felt a surge of pride at Daenerys' decree. Mercy tempered with caution, that was what the realm needed. Yet he was not naive. There would be pockets of resentment, roving bands of outlaws, and scrupulous opportunists. The work of healing a war-torn kingdom was never as simple as a few proclamations. But the mood in the throne room was undeniably lighter when the meeting concluded. People dispersed with urgent tasks, leaving Daenerys and Robb in the cavernous hall. She exhaled, her shoulders sagging slightly in fatigue. "It's a start," she murmured. Robb nodded. "We'll need to check on how well the orders are carried out. But at least the small folk know we're trying." Their conversation was interrupted by the heavy doors groaning open. Ser Barristan Selmy entered, bowing. Though his hair was whiter than ever and lines of age cut into his face, he moved with a knight's grace. "Your Grace," he said. "My lord, I bring word regarding the prisoner." They both knew exactly which prisoner he meant. Cersei Lannister. Robb's jaw tightened. During the chaos of the final seizure of the Red Keep, she'd been taken alive, though not without a last, frantic attempt to kill Daenerys. Since then, she had been confined to a guarded tower. A hush fell between them. "What news?" Daenerys asked, her tone measured. "She's demanded an audience with your Grace," Ser Barristan replied, clearly disapproving. "She refuses to eat unless permitted to speak with you. Qyburn is no longer around to coax her into compliance. Indeed, we can't even find him. Likely fled." Robb frowned. "We can't have her starving herself to death. She must face a proper trial." Daenerys nodded. "Very well. I will see her, but not alone. Ser Barristan, you and Robb will accompany me. Bring 2 Unsullied as well. If she attempts any violence, subdue her, but do not kill her unless absolutely necessary. The realm deserves justice, not a martyr." Ser Barristan bowed. "As you command." They adjourned to gather themselves. Daenerys changed into a simpler outfit, forgoing the circlet. Robb strapped on his sword belt, uncertain if Cersei would indeed try something desperate. He remembered how she'd fought like a cornered animal during the last confrontation in the throne room. A small part of him wanted to see her undone, forced to confront the ruin she had wrought. But he reined in those dark impulses. There had been enough vengeance for a lifetime. Led by Ser Barristan, they ascended spiraling stairs to a tower room where 2 Unsullied stood guard. At a nod from the old knight, they swung the door open. The chamber was sparse, bare walls, a single window barred from the outside, a low table with untouched plates of bread and fruit. Cersei Lannister sat in a chair, posture regal despite her predicament. Her once golden hair, shorn short after the Faith militant's humiliation months ago, had begun to grow out in uneven tufts. She wore a plain gray shift, all finery stripped away. Even so, her green eyes blazed with pride. She rose when Daenerys and Robb entered, ignoring Ser Barristan's stern watchfulness. "So you have come at last," she said, voice dripping with contempt. Daenerys stayed near the door, Robb at her side. I hear you refuse to eat, Daenerys said calmly. Starving yourself gains you nothing. You will have a trial and opportunity to speak. Until then, you remain our prisoner. Cersei laughed, a hollow sound that echoed off the chamber's bare walls. You speak of trials and justice. The same justice that allowed half the realm to burn in your little war? Or the justice that let my children die? Robb clenched his jaw. He recalled how many children and families had suffered at Cersei's hands. She had orchestrated the downfall of House Stark, contributed to the war that devastated the Riverlands, and employed the Mountain in acts of unimaginable brutality. Still, Daenerys remained poised. You will be tried before a council of lords and a representative of the faith, Daenerys continued. For the massacre of innocents, the use of wildfire, and the murder of countless souls. A bitter smirk played on Cersei's lips. So you'll gather them in a hall, read out a list of crimes, and then sentence me to death? Or will it be the headsman's blade this time, instead of dragonfire? Or perhaps you'll have Robb Stark avenge his family with a more personal touch. Her gaze flicked scornfully to Robb. He felt a spike of anger, but forced himself to remain calm. That is for the council to decide, he said. She snorted. You posture as though you're better than me. But I remember you, boy, the young wolf who thought himself unstoppable, only to be betrayed at the twins. You lost everything. Now you cling to this Targaryen conqueror, hoping to salvage some shred of power. Robb refused to rise to the bait. He met her gaze steadily. I stand beside Daenerys because she saved the realm from the dead, because she freed the North from the Boltons, and because she offers a future without treachery and cruelty. Cersei rolled her eyes. Oh, the dead. Yes, I recall your little demonstration. More fear-mongering to manipulate the realm into worshipping your dragons. But you can't fool me. There's always another threat, always another war. You claim moral high ground now, but eventually you'll do anything to maintain the power you've seized. Daenerys's expression darkened, but she kept her voice coldly civil. If you've nothing further to say, I suggest you eat. The trial will come soon enough. Cersei stood silent for a moment, gazing at Daenerys and Robb as though memorizing their faces. Then she spoke, her voice quieter. Fine, bring me food. I'll need my strength to fight you in that council chamber. Robb studied her. He saw pride eroded by desperation. She was a woman who had lost her children, her lovers, her kingdom, everything she once used to define herself. Now she faced a future with no illusions. He almost pitied her, but the memory of his mother's final cries, the slaughter of his bannermen, the countless atrocities under the Lannister banner stilled any empathy. Daenerys turned to leave, and Robb followed. Ser Barristan signaled the guards to stand fast. The door slammed shut, leaving Cersei alone with her bitterness. Descending the tower steps, Daenerys pressed a hand to her temple. Robb noticed the tremor in her exhale. You did well, he said quietly. Maintaining composure. I have no appetite for vengeance, she muttered. But looking at her, it reminds me of all the torment she inflicted, all the lives ruined. I want justice, but I want it done properly, so no one can claim it was a victor's whim. He slipped his arm around her shoulders as they reached the bottom of the staircase. You'll have it. We'll assemble a fair tribunal. Let them hear evidence. Let her speak in her defense. That's more than she ever gave her enemies. The realm will see we're different from her. She glanced up, her lilac eyes thoughtful. Ser Barristan suggests inviting delegates from Dorne, the Reach, and the Vale to preside with me. Perhaps a representative from the North as well, if you'd be willing. And one from the Faith, since the Seven are worshipped by much of the city. Robb nodded. It sounds wise. I'll gladly serve, though I suspect some might see me as biased. But if that's acceptable, I'll do my duty. Let us stand united. They parted ways again, each tending to a flurry of tasks. Robb arranged to dispatch ravens, inviting esteemed lords and clergy to King's Landing. The news that Cersei Lannister would face a formal trial spread swiftly, sparking debate across the realm. Some believed she should be executed outright. Others, especially among the Lannister loyalists, claimed she was a rightful queen and would never receive a fair hearing. But the majority welcomed a transparent process, the prospect that an old era of arbitrary violence might yield to a new system of accountability. Days turned into weeks as lords and envoys trickled into the capital, many with small retinues. The Red Keep's guest chambers filled, forcing some to find lodgings in the city's inns or with allied houses. Daenerys juggled the demands of these arrivals, hosting official welcomes, ensuring no hostilities broke out among the guests. House Martell of Dorne sent a cousin of the late Prince Doran, a quiet but sharp-eyed noblewoman named Lady Maria. The Vale arrived with Lord Robb and Arryn, tall, lanky, still naive in many ways, but accompanied by trusted advisors who guided him. The Riverlands were represented by Edmure Tully, who had emerged from captivity to join the new regime. The North, of course, had Robb, but also Lyanna Mormont, whose fierce presence left no doubt that the North was paying attention. From the Faith of the Seven came the High Septon's delegate, a priest who looked nervous but determined to uphold the faith's precepts. Meanwhile, the city itself slowly stabilized. Shipments of grain began arriving from the Reach. The fishing trade resumed and small markets reopened. Street repairs progressed under the supervision of craftsmen newly employed by the crown. Daenerys' measures to reduce taxes on small merchants garnered cautious praise. People still eyed the Unsullied with wariness, and the Dothraki, who camped outside the walls, fascinated and frightened them in equal measure. But stability edged forward day by day. Robb spent much of his time in council sessions conferring with a broad coalition of lords on how to restructure the kingdom. They had no illusions that centuries of feudal tradition could be erased overnight, but Daenerys championed reforms meant to reduce the worst excesses. Freedmen from Essos offered perspectives on how to avoid recreating the cruelty of slave societies. Northern lords insisted on preserving certain rights and customs. Dornish representatives argued for local autonomy. It was a delicate balancing act, but the presence of Daenerys and Robb, who had proven they could overcome the dead, lent weight to the discussions. Late one evening, after a particularly grueling council session that stretched past dusk, Robb found Daenerys alone in a small reading alcove, an old book open in her lap. A single candle glowed on a side table. She looked up as he approached, her expression weary yet softening at the sight of him. "Still working?" he asked gently. She shut the book. "Might as well be. This volume is about the lineage of previous Targaryen kings, the laws they established. I hope to glean some insight into how the realm was governed before. But reading about them, so many mistakes, so many tragedies." Robb sat beside her, the seat narrow enough that their shoulders almost touched. He inhaled the faint scent of dust and parchment. "History can warn us, but it can't solve our problems for us. We have to forge our own path." A half-smile ghosted across her lips. "I know. I just want so badly to succeed. To prove I'm not another mad king or a tyrant. If I fail, the realm plunges back into chaos." He covered her hand with his own. "We won't let that happen. We made it through the long night. We can handle the challenges of peace." Her gaze lingered on him, that quiet affection kindling between them. Without further thought, she tilted her head to rest on his shoulder. He let out a soft sigh, letting his arm slip around her. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, listening to the distant sounds of footsteps and voices echoing through the Red Keep's corridors. Eventually, she spoke again, her voice hushed as though she feared disturbing the stillness. "Sometimes I think about that night in the Godwood after we took Winterfell back from the Boltons. It felt so much like the end of something and the beginning of something else. Now, here we are in King's Landing, having achieved even more." He recalled the hush of the ancient trees, the swirl of snow, the sense of belonging they'd discovered in each other. "That night changed me," he admitted quietly. "I was no longer just Robb Stark, the exiled king in the North. I realized I could be part of something greater than vengeance. You showed me that." She turned her face up, searching his eyes. "I've never had anyone truly stand beside me like this. My advisors have come and gone. My first husband died. My second set of companions were bound by loyalty but could not always counsel me without fear. You speak your mind even if you disagree. You've seen the worst of war, yet you never let it make you cruel. It's what I admire most about you." Warmth spread through him. He traced the line of her cheek with gentle fingertips. "We had to become who we are or we wouldn't have survived. Our paths brought us together for a reason." The hush between them filled with the unspoken acknowledgement of what they'd shared. The battles, the heartbreak, the flickers of hope. He felt the steady beat of her heart beneath his arm. Sliding closer, he brushed a soft kiss against her temple. She closed her eyes, leaning into him. But the moment was cut short by the sound of approaching footsteps. They broke apart just as Ser Barristan appeared in the alcove's doorway, clearing his throat discreetly. Daenerys sat up straighter, though no embarrassment showed on her face, just mild exasperation at yet another interruption. Apologies, Ser Barristan said with a respectful bow. I bring news. Lord Robb and Arryn has arrived at the Red Keep with his advisors. They request an audience regarding the upcoming trial. It seems they have concerns about how proceedings will be conducted. Daenerys rose, smoothing her gown. Thank you, Ser Barristan. Please inform them that I'll receive them in the solar. Robb, will you join me? He nodded, brushing away a fleeting pang of disappointment that their private interlude was over. Of course. So they went to greet Lord Robb and Arryn, who fidgeted nervously in the solar. The young lord had grown since Robb last saw him. He was taller, though still slight, a pale youth who wore fine velvets and clutched a decorative sword. He was flanked by two older knights who seemed to hold more practical power, and by Petyr Baelish Littlefinger, whose presence made Robb's stomach twist with distrust. Baelish had played a role in the betrayals leading up to the War of the Five Kings, though precisely how deep that involvement went was a matter of suspicion. He had slithered back into the Vale after Sansa Stark had fled King's Landing. Robb had not yet confronted him directly, but he had no illusions that the man was a friend. Daenerys inclined her head courteously. Lord Arryn, welcome. Robin gave a stiff bow. Your Grace. King Robb. He shot a curious glance at Robb as if uncertain whether to call him king in the north or some other title. Then he blurted, we want to be sure this trial is fair. One of his knights stepped forward, smoothing the situation. Forgive Lord Robin. He means to say that the Vale wishes to see justice done according to the laws of the realm, not simply Targaryen proclamations. Daenerys pressed her lips together in a measured smile. We share the goal. That is why we've invited multiple regions to oversee the trial. Representatives from Dorne, the Faith, the Vale, and the North will stand in judgment alongside me. Petyr Baelish interjected, bowing smoothly. If I may speak for a moment, Your Grace? You propose a tribunal. Might I humbly suggest that the Vale's seat on this tribunal be occupied by Lord Robin's regent or counselor? He's still young, and such matters can be complicated. Robin flushed. I'm not a child. I can you. Baelish gave him a patronizing smile. Of course, my lord. I only seek to relieve you of an unwelcome burden. Robb kept his tone neutral. You have a point, Lord Baelish, though the final decision is Lord Robin's. If he feels prepared, we won't turn him away. But if he prefers to delegate, that's acceptable. He watched Baelish carefully, suspecting the man would love nothing more than to take that seat of power for himself. Robin blinked uncertainly, glancing between Baelish and Daenerys. Well, I suppose it might be best if Ser Vardis here, he gestured to the older knight, represents the Vale. He understands law better than I do. Ser Vardis bowed. I'll do my utmost in your name, my lord. Daenerys nodded approvingly. Then it's settled. The tribunal will consist of Ser Vardis for the Vale, Lady Marya for Dorne, Edmure Tully for the Riverlands, and I will lead. The Faith's delegate will join us, and Robb will sit as well, representing the North. That way each major region has a voice. Baelish's smile never wavered, but Robb noted a certain flicker in his eyes as though he weighed how best to exploit the arrangement. A splendid solution, Baelish purred. We appreciate your willingness to consider the Vale's perspective. Daenerys folded her hands. We appreciate the Vale's cooperation in helping to restore order. Now, if there's nothing else, Lord Robin, I'd be happy to offer you and your party rooms in the Tower of the Hand for the duration of your stay. Please inform us if you need anything further. Robin bowed, seemingly content with the arrangement. Baelish offered a final flourish and led the group out. Once they were gone, Daenerys let out a soft breath, tension slipping from her posture. She turned to Robb. He's young, but at least he's honest in his intentions. That's more than I can say for Baelish. Robb nodded, scanning the door through which they'd departed. We'll watch him closely. He always has some angle. My sister Sansa once warned me about him, though I never got the full story. I suspect he had a hand in many misfortunes. But for now, as long as he doesn't openly disrupt our rule, we can tolerate him. She glanced at him, a wry curve on her lips. We can't fight every threat with swords, can we? He gave a slight shrug. No, we can't. Sometimes a clever tongue is more dangerous than a sword. But we're learning. The day of Cersei's trial arrived under a sky streaked with pale dawn clouds. The throne room was transformed, a long wooden bench erected at the base of the Iron Throne where the appointed judges would sit, Daenerys, Robb, Lady Marya, Edmure Tully, Ser Vardis, and the Faith's delegate. Before it, a cleared space where the prisoner would stand, flanked by guards. Observers crowded the sides, lords and ladies from across Westeros, city officials, and even some small folk who had been permitted entry to witness a momentous event. Cersei was brought in, wrists manacled, escorted by a pair of unsullied. She wore a modest gown of black, her hair still short, eyes smoldering with fury. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the hall. She did not tremble, but her lips were pressed thin, her chin raised in defiance. Daenerys indicated that the charges be read: mass murder via wildfire, conspiracy to murder King Robert Baratheon, complicity in atrocities during the War of the Five Kings, the Red Wedding's planning, treason against the realm by disregarding the undead threat, and more. Cersei stared straight ahead, neither confirming nor denying. Witnesses were called. Some were knights who had served the crown, city dwellers who had lost kin in the Great September Explosion, or soldiers who'd survived the Red Wedding. Others recounted how her alliances led to the downfall of key houses, how she used the faith militant to eliminate rivals. Each testament landed like stones in a great pile of evidence. At times, Baelish or other cunning tongues tried to spin the facts, sowing doubt. But enough corroboration emerged. Edmure Tully, weary and grim, spoke of the destruction wrought in the Riverlands, how Frymen boasted of Lannister gold paying for betrayal. Throughout it all, Cersei remained ice-cold. Yet Robb sensed her fury building. Finally, when given a chance to speak, she rose from her seat, chains clinking. A hush spread as she regarded each face on the tribunal. "You say I brought war," she began in a low voice. "But war was always here. My father fought for the crown before I was born. Robert Baratheon rebelled against a Targaryen tyrant. Then came the War of the Five Kings. For centuries, Westeros has known more conflict than peace. I did what I had to do to protect my children and my house. And yes, I used the tools at my disposal. Wildfire, alliances, cunning. But you," her gaze flicked to Daenerys, "incinerated cities across the narrow sea, broke open the gates of Slaver's Bay, and left chaos in your wake. You," she turned to Robb, "waged war on the Lannisters once, and you nearly destroyed the realm in your pursuit of vengeance. Each of you is stained with blood. But you stand in judgment, and I stand in chains. That is the only difference." Silence hung in the hall. Robb exchanged a quick glance with Daenerys. While they had spilt blood, they had done so in self-defense or to stop oppression, not for personal gain or cruel ambition. Still, Cersei's words carried the rancid truth that war spares no one from guilt. Daenerys' gaze was steady, though faint sadness flickered in her eyes. "You tried to kill me even after I came to show you the threat beyond the wall," Daenerys said quietly. "I fought the undead, and you planned to stab me in the back. That was not about protecting your children. Your children were gone by then. It was about power." A murmur ran through the crowd. Cersei's face contorted with rage. "Yes, my children were taken from me. You speak as though you know that pain? You cannot. When you lose everything, you'll cling to the last shreds of control you have. I did what anyone with the will to live would do." Lady Marya of Dorne spoke next, her voice cultured and cold. "My land lost its prince to your machinations. The Sand Snakes died seeking vengeance for Oberyn Martell. We have suffered greatly at the hands of your alliance with the Mountain, one of the realm's foulest murderers. Do not speak as though you alone have known loss." Cersei leveled a glare at the Dornish lady but said nothing. Daenerys signaled for the faith's delegate to read the final statements and ask any last questions. The priest cleared his throat, directing queries to the prisoner about the destruction of the Great September. Cersei refused to answer, staring off with stony silence. When the delegates withdrew briefly to confer, tension lay thick in the air. Robb remained with Daenerys, their hands clasped under the table's edge. She looked pale but resolute. The hush in the throne room felt absolute, broken only by the faint shuffling of feet. Cersei waited, chin high, as though daring them to condemn her. At last, the delegates returned. One by one, they declared her guilty. Daenerys pronounced the final sentence, voice ringing with authority. "Cersei Lannister, you have committed high treason against the realm, orchestrated mass murder, and ignored the threat that could have destroyed us all. By unanimous verdict, you are condemned to death. The manner will be swift as a final mercy. May the gods judge you in the afterlife." A collective exhale rolled through the assembled crowd. Some had expected a more brutal punishment, dragonfire, perhaps. But Daenerys signaled that the sentence would be carried out cleanly with a headsman's sword. Robb saw no triumph in her face, only a weary acceptance. Cersei laughed, the sound brittle, tears gathering in her eyes but not falling. "Then do it," Cersei spat. "You're all hypocrites if you think this will rid Westeros of violence. Kill me, burn me, it won't matter. The wheel will keep turning." Daenerys' expression did not waver. "I promise to break the wheel. I still intend to. Farewell, Cersei." Cersei made no plea for mercy. Guards escorted her away and the crowd parted, whispering in hushed voices. Some lords looked grim, others relieved. The city had wanted justice for the September's destruction, for the terror unleashed. Now they had it, or at least a version of it. Robb remembered how he once dreamed of seeing the Lannisters pay for their betrayal of his father. It was an empty feeling now that the moment had come. No execution could bring back the dead. But perhaps, with Cersei gone, Westeros could finally close a bloody chapter. The next day, the headsman carried out the sentence outside the city gates, on a platform erected for the purpose. Many gathered to witness, but Daenerys and Robb remained within the Red Keep. She had decreed that feeding a spectacle of violence would serve no purpose. The realm had enough gore behind it. Let the execution be swift, without theatrics. Thus, Cersei Lannister died under the broad morning sky, a final casualty of the brutal era she had helped shape. Some said she met the sword with defiant silence. Others claimed she cursed Daenerys and Robb until her last breath. Either way, her chapter was closed. In the aftermath, the realm collectively inhaled, as if emerging from a long, suffocating night. Tywin Lannister's golden legacy lay in ashes. Cersei's name would live in infamy. Jaime, freed after cooperating, wandered uncertainly, stripped of titles and haunted by regrets. Tyrion reappeared, offering measured counsel to Daenerys. The great houses, mindful of the new queen's power and her proven willingness to abide by fair process, realigned themselves. One by one, they swore fealty, not out of forced subjugation, but a wary hope that perhaps this time, the monarchy might steer the realm toward a less tumultuous age. In King's Landing, the changes multiplied. Daenerys named a new council of advisors. Tyrion Lannister as Master of Coin, Edmure Tully as Master of Laws. Ser Barristan returned to a role akin to Lord Commander of the Queen's Guard, and Grey Worm was recognized as the Supreme Commander of the Unsullied. Robb was offered the hand of the Queen position, but he chose instead to remain a more direct representative of the North's interests, something akin to a co-ruler who balanced Targaryen authority with Stark tradition. Daenerys respected his decision, acknowledging that he needed to ensure the North was never again neglected by a southern regime. Peace did not come overnight, but day by day, the city's clamor shifted from fear to determination. Refugees trickled back to their villages if they found them still standing, or else set down roots near King's Landing, lured by the chance to start anew. Roads were patrolled by combined forces wearing both dragon and direwolf sigils, a living reminder of the unity forged in the long night. But for all these strides, the realm was enormous, and outlaws, rogue lords, and unscrupulous merchants still tested the Queen's will. The Iron Islands remained a thorn in her side. Euron Greyjoy had disappeared, rumored to be amassing a new fleet. Yara Greyjoy, allied with Daenerys, tried to keep him at bay, but the seas were vast. In the Stormlands, certain pockets of bandits preyed on travelers. In the Crownlands, ex-Lannister officers occasionally stirred trouble. The wheel had not been entirely smashed. It turned more slowly, yes, but the risk of slipping back into chaos remained if vigilance faltered. Amid these challenges, Daenerys and Robb discovered that the bond between them had deepened in ways both expected and surprising. Shared nights in the quiet recesses of the Red Keep became a balm after endless days of statecraft. Yet they found little time for open declarations of what they meant to each other. The realm watched them closely. Some courtiers whispered about a possible royal marriage that would seal the alliance between Targaryen and Stark, uniting the two greatest names in Westeros. Others worried such a union might alienate those who feared House Stark's ascendancy or resented a foreign queen. Both Daenerys and Robb were keenly aware that the politics of the Seven Kingdoms made a formal betrothal fraught. If they wed, would the North lose its growing independence? If they remained unwed, would people question Daenerys' stability on the throne? And beyond all that, there was the personal question, were they both ready to reforge the monarchy in such a way, bearing the burden as spouses as well as co-rulers? The tension of these unasked questions lingered as the days rolled on. One dusk, after a long session with Tyrion and the new council discussing the reconstruction of the Crownlands, Daenerys retreated to her private balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. Robb found her there, the setting sun painting her hair in shades of gold and pink. She offered him a weary smile when he joined her. "Another day done," she said softly, gaze on the distant horizon. He leaned against the stone rail. "How many more like it until we can finally breathe easily?" Her smile held a trace of wry humor. "I suspect ruling means never truly breathing easily. But maybe it gets less frantic." They lapsed into silence, listening to the lap of waves below. Finally, she turned to him. I've been speaking with Tyrion about the future. The realm needs a sense of permanence, a stable line of succession. People are already asking. They always do. He didn't miss the slight tremor in her voice. Tyrion wants you to marry? She inclined her head. He mentions it often. That if I wish to secure the loyalty of the kingdoms, I should take a husband from among the great houses. And if I do not produce an heir, we risk civil war upon my death. Robb studied her. He's not wrong that stability is vital. But it's your choice. Who you marry and whether you do it all should be yours alone. You're not a broodmare for the crown. She exhaled, a faint tension in her shoulders. I know, but the realm expects so much. Our alliance has become the cornerstone of everything we've built. We hold the North and the South together by trust. People see it as a sign, a symbol. Part of me wonders if formally joining houses Targaryen and Stark might be the best path forward. We could stand as a united monarchy, both fire and ice represented. His heart thudded. He recalled the night in the Godswood, the moment they overcame the Night King, and the hush of the throne room when they passed sentence on Cersei. They had been side by side through trials none could imagine. The idea of sharing a life, not just an alliance, ignited a warmth in him. But he also remembered the pitfalls. Would the North accept it? He asked quietly. They've long resented being under Southern rule. I've tried to show them that you respect our ways, but a marriage might bring old fears back. She reached for his hand. If you remain king in the North, if the North keeps its customs, I'd never try to override that. You've seen how we've begun to incorporate your traditions. And in King's Landing, I'll continue to be recognized as Queen of the Southern Realms. It'd be a dual monarchy, 2 thrones under one roof, so to speak. His breath caught at the enormity of it. A shared rule, he murmured. We'd be forging something entirely new. No precedent for it. She nodded, eyes earnest. Yes, but we already are forging something new. The realm has never had a Targaryen queen who destroyed slavery overseas, who allied with a revived Stark king to defeat the dead. Why not take the next step? He looked out at the water, the glow of the setting sun turning the horizon to embers. His mind raced with 1,000 considerations: loyalty to the North, the memory of his father's execution, the pledge he made to avenge his family. Yet in Daenerys he had found not just a partner in war, but a friend, a companion who understood the lonely burden of rulership. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. Daenerys, he said softly, turning back to her. I would stand beside you in whatever way you need. The North is rebuilding and they trust me. If we show them that you honor their freedoms, that we remain equal partners, I believe they'd stand by us. A smile, tentative but filled with hope, lifted her features. And you, Robb, is this the path you want? He took her free hand, feeling the delicate bones under his calloused palm. Since the day we stood under that weirwood tree, I've known we share more than an alliance. I want to rule with you, not just as a figurehead from the North or a general, but truly at your side. I can't think of anyone else who could understand what we've been through. Her eyes shone with relief and joy, and she let out a small laugh. Then we shall do it, carefully with the right words and the right gestures so no one feels threatened. But yes, let's unite our houses. Let's shape a realm that our people can believe in. They held each other in the warm light of the dying sun, hearts pounding, the weight of unspoken promises pressing in. There was no formal proposal or ring of betrothal. They simply understood that they would stand side by side, sealing with love what war and necessity had first brought together. In the weeks that followed, rumors spread of a forthcoming royal union, but no official statement was made yet. Daenerys continued to quietly work with Tyrion on the legal aspects, drafting a new arrangement that recognized the North's autonomy while acknowledging the Queen's authority in all southern realms. Robb coordinated with the Northern Lords, traveling briefly to Winterfell to meet with Lady Lyanna Mormont, Lord Manderley, and other staunch supporters. He made it clear that if he took Daenerys to wife, the North would remain in charge of its own affairs but recognized her as queen of the southern kingdoms. Most accepted the idea, especially once Robb explained how Daenerys had defended the North from the undead and was not demanding fealty but extending partnership. Some grumbled, but they were overruled by the memory of how she had risked her life to save them. Returning to King's Landing, Robb found the capital abuzz with speculation. Merchants debated how a Targaryen-Stark union might affect trade. Street performers composed bawdy songs about the wolf and the dragon. The city's mood brightened, eager for a celebration that didn't revolve around war or punishment. At last, Daenerys and Robb held a formal audience in the throne room attended by lords, knights, and ambassadors. She stood on the dais, clad in a dress of pale silver, and announced the betrothal. Robb was at her side, wearing a doublet embroidered with the Stark dire wolf and Targaryen dragon interwoven in a swirling design. Gasps and applause mingled. Most lords bowed, some with genuine excitement, others with cautious acceptance. Tyrion observed from the sidelines, a faint smirk revealing his satisfaction. The wedding date was set for a month hence, enough time to gather allies and arrange festivities. It would be a ceremony the likes of which Westeros had rarely seen, merging two great traditions, Northern and Targaryen, in a single vow. There would be the old gods invoked by the presence of a weirwood branch brought from the north and the faith of the Seven blessing for those in the south. Daenerys insisted that the Dothraki be allowed to celebrate in their own way outside the city walls, a festival of fire and feats of horse riding. The Unsullied, stoic as ever, would stand guard with pride. In the days leading up to the wedding, guests arrived in droves. The Martells, the Aarons, the Tullis, the Tyrell cousins who had survived the Lannister purge, the Starks from across the north, and more. White harbor ships glided into the Blackwater bearing fine salted fish and northern delicacies. Dornish caravans brought succulent wines and exotic spices. The streets teemed with travelers, minstrels, and peddlers hawking trinkets. King's Landing had not seen such life and color in years. The morning of the wedding dawned bright, with the sky a crisp blue, a gentle breeze rustling the banners. The ceremony took place in the great courtyard of the Red Keep, where a special platform had been erected under a canopy of flowers. High above, Drogon and Regal circled, occasionally letting loose a roar that echoed across the rooftops. Soldiers from both the north and the south lined the perimeter. The noble guests filled benches arranged around the platform, while common folk craned their necks from beyond the walls or from rooftops. Daenerys arrived in a procession that included Dothraki bloodriders, several handmaidens from Meereen, and a small retinue of Westerosi ladies. She wore a gown that combined northern furs around her shoulders with draconic embroidery trailing down the sleeves, silver threads forming the outlines of dragon wings. Missandei, no longer with her but remembered fondly, had once commented on how Daenerys' destiny would unite continents. And here she was, bridging not only Essos and Westeros but the north and south. Her hair was braided intricately, tiny dragon clasps glinting. Robb stood on the dais, heart-thumping. He wore a cloak of dark gray trimmed with white fur. His family's direwolf sigil was embroidered on the back, while a smaller dragon's sigil graced the collar. Lady Lyanna Mormont served as one of his witnesses, along with Ser Barristan for Daenerys. Tyrion was present too, discreetly offering suggestions on ceremony. A hush fell as Daenerys ascended the steps to stand before Robb. The Fates delegate, flanked by a piece of weirwood branch on a small altar, conducted the combined rite. He invited them to speak vows that blended the old gods and the new. Robb went first, voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. I, Robb Stark, son of Eddard and Catelyn, king in the north, pledge myself to Daenerys Targaryen, breaker of chains, queen of the Undulls and the Rhoynar, and the first men, in the sight of gods old and new, to stand beside her, protect her, and share in her burdens, that the realm might know justice and peace. Daenerys' eyes glistened, her voice carrying quiet conviction. I, Daenerys Storeborn of House Targaryen, swear to join my life to yours, Robb Stark, king in the north. I vow to uphold the freedom and honor of your people, just as I uphold the peace of the realm. May my dragons be a shield to you, as your direwolf's strength stands with me, so that none shall tear us apart. The Fates delegate then sprinkled a few drops of water, symbolizing the new. Lady Lyanna touched the weirwood branch to their joined hands, symbolizing the old. With that final gesture, they were pronounced bonded before all. A roar of approval erupted. The horns of the city blew, dragons overhead bellowed, and the cheering of thousands filled the air. Robb leaned in and kissed Daenerys, the world spinning into color and thunderous applause. The feast that followed was a dazzling affair, tables laden with roasted meats, fresh fruits, exotic Essosi dishes, Dornish wines, and northern Alesh. Musicians played lively tunes and the Dothraki performed breathtaking feats of horse mastery in the outer courtyard. Lords mingled, forging new alliances. The tension of war had, at least for the moment, given way to celebration. Robb and Daenerys drifted from table to table, greeting guests. Tyrion cracked witticisms, half drunk on fine arbor gold. Lady Maria of Dorne congratulated them with a sly grin, hinting that Dorne might soon take advantage of the peace to expand trade routes. Lyanna Mormont, stoic as ever, gave them a curt bow of respect, though Robb caught a subtle glimmer of fondness in her eyes. Even Peter Baelish approached, offering oily compliments, though Robb trusted him no more than before. Still, the atmosphere was one of respite, a moment carved out of the ravages of history. As night deepened, the wedding party continued under torchlight. The stars twinkled above and the dragons soared against the moonlit sky in a kind of aerial dance, mesmerizing onlookers. Eventually, Daenerys and Robb withdrew from the throng, escaping to a quieter corner of the keep. They stood at a balcony that overlooked the city where lanterns glowed like fireflies below. The distant hum of music and laughter reached them. She slid her hand into his, gazing up with eyes that reflected the torchlight. "We did it," she whispered. "After everything, we stand together and the realm celebrates instead of cowers." He gently tucked a stray lock of silver hair behind her ear. "It feels unreal," he admitted. "I've spent so many years fighting, first the Lannisters, then the Boltons, then the dead. Now I'm your husband and you're my wife. A new era." Her lips curved in a soft smile. "A new era indeed. Tomorrow we'll resume the burdens of ruling. But tonight let's allow ourselves to hope, to believe that maybe the storms have passed." He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. "For now at least." His voice dropped to a murmur. "You're right. We've earned this moment of peace." They shared a tender kiss, the flicker of torches painting them in warm shades of gold. In that suspended breath of time, the sorrow of war and the weight of crowning destinies melted away, leaving only two souls who had found solace in each other against all odds. Dawn's first light roused them from slumber in a spacious chamber that had once belonged to Targaryen princes centuries past. Sunbeams danced across woven rugs and gilded furniture. Daenerys stirred at Robb's side, blinking away dreams. He brushed a feather-light kiss on her shoulder. Outside, the city yawned awake, vendors setting up stalls, guards patrolling the walls, the routine of day-to-day life continuing as though nothing had changed. Yet everything had. That morning, as they breakfasted with the new small council, Tyrion offered a flamboyant bow. "Congratulations, your graces," he said. "Or should I address you as King and Queen Wolf Dragon? King Dragonwolf? The realm is abuzz with the possibilities." Robb chuckled ruefully. "Just call us by our names, Tyrion. Or if you must be formal, Queen Daenerys and King Robb." "Ah, but that's two titles to keep track of," Tyrion said, swirling wine in his cup. "Maybe we can invent a single style for you both. We can debate that later." Daenerys rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "We have more pressing business. The Iron Islands remain an issue. Yara Greyjoy sent a raven describing ongoing raids from Euron's followers, though no one has seen Euron himself." Grey Worm offered a curt nod. "We can send ships to patrol, but not all of the royal fleet is rebuilt yet. We need more time." Robb tapped a finger on the table where a map lay pinned by weights. "Let's coordinate with Yara. She knows those waters best. If we rid them of these raiders, the shipping lanes along the west coast will be safer. That helps us feed the populace and maintain trade." "Is that something you can oversee, Tyrion?" He nodded. "Indeed. I'll see to the logistics. Master of Ships is still a vacant position, so I'll fill that gap temporarily." They turned to Edmure Tully, who reported that the Riverlands rebuilding was well underway with new trade roads linking to King's Landing. The conversation circled around to other topics, finalizing a revised system of taxes that wouldn't crush the small folk, establishing a rotating presence of Northern Knights in King's Landing, and ensuring the Freedmen's Council from Essos had input on the new legal codes. After the meeting, Daenerys and Robb moved through the city together, greeting well-wishers and discussing a plan to forge a more permanent seat of power for themselves. King's Landing was the center of the Southern Kingdom, but the North demanded attention as well. Their conclusion was an alternating schedule. They would spend half the year in King's Landing, half the year in Winterfell, ensuring neither realm felt neglected. In their absence, councils in each seat would manage day-to-day affairs, subject to royal oversight. It was unorthodox, but so were they. In the months that followed, the new monarchy found its rhythm. Euron Greyjoy did indeed reappear, leading a ragtag fleet in an attempt to ambush Yara's forces. The engagement ended in his defeat, with Yara capturing him alive. She dragged him in chains to King's Landing, where Daenerys and Robb gave him a prompt trial. Lacking Cersei's cunning, Euron had few defenders. He was condemned and executed, ending the last significant threat at sea. The Iron Islands, under Yara's leadership, agreed to a loose fealty to the crown in exchange for autonomy in their local governance. In the Stormlands, rebellious pockets were quelled by a combination of diplomacy and firm policing. Bandit lords surrendered or faced swift justice. In the Reach, the Tyrell cousins reorganized Highgarden, pledging grain shipments to King's Landing. Dorne remained proud but increasingly cooperative, forging trade relations with the Crownlands. Meanwhile, in the north, Robb's presence each winter strengthened the bonds between Winterfell and King's Landing. Daenerys found a certain fascination in the northern lands, learning to appreciate the quiet grandeur of snow-blanketed forests, the howling wind across the Frostfangs. The people of the north, for their part, warmed to the queen who had fought the dead in their defense. Between governance and travel, Daenerys and Robb cherished the fleeting moments they had to themselves. The burdens of rule were immense, but the knowledge that they shared them equally eased the loneliness. On many nights, they would find time to walk along the battlements hand in hand, discussing everything from minor disputes among petty lords to grand visions of a realm free from the cyclical violence that had shaped Westeros for too long. When a year passed since their wedding, they held a commemorative feast in the Red Keep, inviting the realm's major lords to reflect on what had been achieved. Peace was never absolute, but major conflicts had subsided, roads were safer, and a sense of cautious optimism had taken root. In the Great Hall, Daenerys rose to toast their guests. A year ago, King Robb and I joined our lives and our causes, hoping to heal a realm battered by war and threatened by darkness, she said, her voice carrying the authority of one who had faced death and triumphed. That darkness was vanquished, but we all know that the living can be as cruel as any monster if left unchecked. Yet here we stand, striving to govern with fairness, to mend old wounds, and to ensure that none stand above the law. We've made missteps, we will make more. But with your support, we will continue to shape a future for all Westeros. Applause filled the hall, banners swaying in the draft. Robb stood next, raising his cup. I was once a boy who marched south full of pride, believing war and vengeance could solve everything. I learned the hardest way how fragile life is, how treachery shatters trust. I nearly lost my life, my house, my hope, but the gods saw fit to spare me. They led me to Daenerys Targaryen, and together we discovered that unity, not vengeance, can save us from destruction. May that lesson guide us all. The applause this time was thunderous. Men who had once fought on opposite sides now lifted cups in unison. Laughter rippled. The first notes of music struck up. Daenerys and Robb shared a smile, stepping down to mingle with guests. Late that night, after the revelry subsided, they found themselves in the quiet corridor outside their shared chambers. Torchlight flickered across the stone walls, playing shadows over their intertwined hands. Daenerys paused, looking up at Robb with a soft expression. "Do you ever miss the days when we were just soldiers with no realm on our shoulders?" she asked gently, recalling the weeks when they simply fought side by side. No massive bureaucracy to manage. He considered. Sometimes, it was simpler then. Fight the enemy in front of you, survive until dawn. But we can't go back. And I wouldn't want to lose what we have now. She nodded. Me neither. We've both lost too much to want anything but to move forward. Her hand drifted to her stomach for a moment, a thoughtful gesture. Then she raised her gaze to meet his. If we have children someday, I want them to inherit not a legacy of war, but one of hope. That's the future we're forging. A gentle warmth kindled in Robb's chest. I want that too, he said, pulling her close. He pressed a lingering kiss to her brow. Let them grow up without the nightmares we faced. She melted into his embrace, her voice a quiet hum against his chest. Then we keep building, day by day, with faith in each other. Fire and ice, forging something new. In that stillness, torchlight dancing on the walls, they allowed themselves a fleeting moment to simply be two people who had found love amid ruin and forged a kingdom out of the ashes. Dawn would bring fresh challenges, but they no longer faced them alone. From the God's Wood of Winterfell to the scorched dunes of Meereen, from the frozen battlefield against the dead to the triumph at King's Landing, they had walked side by side. The realm recognized them as the Dragon Queen and the Wolf King, an unthinkable pair who had saved the living from the darkness and united an exhausted land under a fragile but genuine peace. They stood on the cusp of a new era, where swords might finally rest and the land could heal. And in that quiet corridor, wrapped in each other's arms, they silently promised to see that dream through, come what may.